Shalom and thank you for listening to Progressively Jewish. The theme of our podcast today is community, and it corresponds to the weekly Torah portion, Bo. I am delighted to introduce to you the members of Nottingham Liberal Synagogue, Jesse and Dan Clark, OBE, Karen and Solly Worth, and Darren Barker, who will talk in this episode about their community and the future of progressive Judaism. Hello and welcome to Progressively Jewish podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to ask Solly the very first question. You are a member of the Jewish progressive community. What made you join it in the first place?
Well, for me, joining the progressive community wasn't necessarily so much a choice as something I was born into, my mother having been a member for a good amount of time before, and I was brought up as a member of the community. So for me, it's just always been something that has been there in my life.
That was an easy question, isn't it, Solly? What do Jesse got to say? What does Jesse has got to say? Answering the same question.
Yeah, so like Solly, I was born into and brought up within Nottingham Liberal Synagogue. My mum was a member, but having grown up, I've now rejoined as a member, and I think that is probably because of that strong link with family and community, and having sort of moved away when I went to university, realizing that perhaps I wanted something familiar, and that was an important part of my own identity and my own way of thinking about who I was and how I understood the world is a really important part of being a member.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That's interesting. Now I will ask your dad, why did he join our community? Dan Clark.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, I suppose the simple answer is I joined the community because my wife was a lifelong member of the community. Of course, we weren't married at the time. At the time I first had a connection with liberal Judaism, we were both still 17, both still at sixth form. But I became associated with the community right back then. The slightly more complicated version is, although I was associated with the community from right back then, I had what you might call a fairly long probationary period, because it was about 15 years after that first contact before I converted and became a member in my own right.
That's really interesting, Dan. You see, it was special for you to come on the Progressively Jewish podcast for me to find out that actually you converted, you made that decision only 15 years after you and Jill married. Oh, that's better for us. You made a great asset for our community. And now I would like to ask Darren Barker, who is married into the third generation of the members of our community, asking, you've got your children are third generation. I think Darren's wife, Gemma, is the second generation of the members of our community. What made you join our community?
So I mean, probably the food, I think, was the driving factor. As well as love. So I met Gemma, and so my sort of religious background really was a very sort of loose Christianity through my parents. Very, very informal. My parents weren't great churchgoers either, and neither was I. But when I met Gemma, I started to get sort of slowly integrated into the liberal Jewish community through all of the great festivals and events. So the answer, I suppose, is kind of love and immersion in sort of Jewish culture. And now I am Jewish because I converted. So Gemma and I did a year-long course at Southgate Progressive Synagogue. And I converted, which was a great sort of process, and very enjoyable, and I've met many of my sort of lifelong friends through that process, and we're now very much kind of part of this very sort of all-embracing liberal community in Nottingham. So the short answer, food, but yes, love.
Oh, that's lovely, Darren. And you're now a member of the vision committee. We come up now with the vision for the whole community, and that's wonderful to have you on that. Well, thank you very much. Food and love. And I wonder, what was the reason for Karen Worth, Solly's mum, to join our community in the first place? Was it food or love, Karen?
Well, all of those, both of those things are also important to me. But I was born into a liberal Jewish family in London and was raised through Finchley Progressive Synagogue, which was very important to me. And then when I came to Nottingham to go to university, I basically started a very loose connection as a student, and then it was years later when I sort of...
Good morning, Owen.
Good morning, Charlie. Lovely to see you. And I'm sure, like me, you're absolutely on a roll and all over the place with excitement this morning.
I am.
So much to get through. And it's really all about collaboration, inclusion, breaking down walls, and taking away some great ideas for where we're going next and how we're going to really include everyone, or to use my watchword, inclusion in action is what it's about today. Back to you.
You're right, Owen. This is the take-home part of our programme, and we've got a really exciting schedule, and I'm just going to give a quick run-through of what lies ahead just so our listeners can really follow the programme today. But before I do, I just want to remind people that what they were listening to was Rabbi Tanya and members of Nottingham on the Progressively Jewish podcast, which, along with Do You Know What, gives us two amazing podcast offerings that our listeners might want to take away with them if they're missing Biennial conference afterwards, and they're available both on iTunes and on Spotify and other good podcast accessible stations. Anyway, back to today's program. So next we've got what's the future of 21st century Judaism, and we've got a whole panel of people who may not, except for Rabbi Tanya, be members of liberal communities, are certainly part of the extended liberal Jewish family, and we're really glad that they'll be with us today, but I'll leave the panel to introduce themselves. And then at the same time, or at 10 o'clock, we've got Ma'amad, which is on the LJY-Netzer Zoom link. And that's with our amazing LJY team led by Jess and Josh. At 10:30, we've got Creating British Jewish Community Outside the Establishment, which is an incredible alternative Jewish spaces panel. And that will be led by Rabbi Leah Jordan, one of your co-chair, Owen, of Biennial. We've then got Breaking Down Walls, Lessons from Our Youth and Our Young Adult Communities, and that's at 11:30 on 11:30. And remember, everything is both live on our streaming channels, but also you can join the Zoom watch parties if you have registered for Biennial. And that's featuring JW3, BKY, Norwich Liberal Community, and our chaplain, our very own chaplain, Rabbi Anna Posner. We've got a whole series of lunch and learns today, one with Rabbi Dr. Margaret Jacoby, one with Rabbi Alexandra Wright, another with Rabbi Richard Jacoby and Mish Sampson, who's going to feature a lot today as we have our real musical end of the programme as well. Breaking Down Walls is next at 2 o'clock with Rabbi Leah Morstein and a whole host of other liturgical specialists talking about breaking down walls in a liberal Jewish liturgy. And then at 3 o'clock, we're very excited to be welcoming Stephen Bush, the author of the Race and Inclusivity report from the Board of Deputies. And he's going to be in conversation with Tamara Joseph from Finchley Progressive. And I'm also going to appear talking about liberal Judaism reaction to the report. And we end our day then with Inclusion in Action, our bid, Owen, that you've been so fundamental in leading on, and for our communities to apply for appeal for money. We've got a bid of £3,000 to have an inclusion in action project. And finally, we end the day with our take home, which features all sorts of people, but perhaps most important to note that will be when we're going to both announce the award, who wins the money, but also our Chairs Awards, which is just such a fantastic opportunity to thank our communities. So lots going on today, Owen.
Much to do, much to think about. That's the really important thing. I'm absolutely beside myself with excitement, which is looking forward to it all.
So, Owen, I think we've probably been on screen for far too long already, and we should hand over to our panel. And I am just so delighted to welcome Elizabeth Harris to chair this panel for us, a great friend to me and also to many of us in liberal Judaism. Good morning, Liz. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here at my first biennial.
Really, a Shahechiani moment, and I'm so sure it won't be your last. Anyway, thank you for being here and enjoy.
I will. Good morning. Thank you so much again. Women are agents of social change and conflict resolution the world over. And in the Jewish world, you only have to look at movements for peace and social justice, Women Wage Peace in Israel, founders of organizations for social justice in the UK, such as Selim and Nahamu, represented today, to see that Jewish women are leading change for the benefit of all our community and way beyond, even when challenged with breaking down the highest and most impenetrable of walls. And each woman on the panel today has climbed a wall and created significant change to make the world just a little kinder, a little more just, and more inclusive. During COVID, one of the positive trends was watching some of the walls between different parts of our communities coming down, where previously it might not have been possible. I myself initiated a Daf Yomi group that's completely cross-communal and beyond. This was partly due to technology. Zoom created a situation where we could have a window into different parts of our community that we might not have had the courage or wish to enter previously, or to easily connect with people that we might not otherwise have engaged with. And this was coupled with the fact that Jews, throughout our history, we've always demonstrated that we can come together during times of crisis. This is one of our strengths, but it doesn't always hold true once the crisis has passed. Now that hopefully we're moving into COVID recovery, how we maintain and advance inclusion constructively will be a really important question. And today we're talking about the future of inclusion in our community and the specific contributions that women leaders can make to this with 4 remarkable women. The very fact that they're here together as a panel speaks volumes in itself. So men, take note. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Rabbi Robin Ashworth-Dean, who is the principal rabbi at Manchester Reform. There she is.
Hi,
Lovely,
Liz.
Robin. Hi. Robin is a passionate social justice activist, having worked as a human rights lawyer before training for the rabbinate, as well as her work with Selim, which she founded, the rabbinic and cantoral call for social and economic justice in the UK. She's co-chair of Greater Manchester Citizens, a broad-based community organising movement, and a chaplain of the One Love team for the universities. Robin has published journal articles and other works, including a chapter in the recently published book, Mapping Faith, Theologies of Migration and Community. Robin regularly appears on BBC Radio Manchester, Radio 4's Beyond Belief, and is a Pause for Thought contributor. She was named in last year's 40 Under 40 Awards in the Jewish News. Robin is interested in creating relational, textured, activist communities built by individuals who are enabled to step into their own power and collectively organise for a more just world. Welcome, Robin. And my second panellist is Rabbi Erin London. Erin received Semicha from Yeshivat Maharat in 2017. For those that don't know, that's in the US. She holds an MA in Applied Drama from Goldsmith, the University of London, and a BA from Goucher College, where her focus was the intergenerational theatre, community building, and theatre with older adults, which led her to work for a number of years in adult care settings. Following Smicha, Rabbi Erin worked and trained as a multi-faith and Jewish hospital chaplain at New York Presbyterian Hospital with a speciality in palliative care. Since arriving in the UK, Rabbi Erin has served as one of the Jewish chaplains at North London Hospice and is involved in various projects within the Jewish community in the UK and beyond. Welcome, Erin. Rabbi Tanya Zakinovich. Rabbi Tanya was, there she is. Rabbi Tanya was appointed full-time rabbi of Nottingham Liberal Synagogue in 2009, so she's no stranger to all of you. Rabbi Tanya was born in Minsk, Belarus. She was involved in coordinating community and education programs for the World Union of Progressive Judaism in both Minsk and Moscow. In 2004, she moved to London to study for the rabbinate at Leo Beck College and came to Nottingham Liberal Synagogue after her ordination. Rabbi Tanya's community engagement has grown over the years. She is a member of the Ethical Improvement Committee of the School of Pharmacy at Nottingham University and of the Bishop's Breakfast. She's a member of the Shrovalti Committee and a member of the Crown Court Panel on Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence. Rabbi Tanya is very proud to be a co-founder and trustee of the Jewish Muslim charity Salam Shalom Kitchen, a free weekly meal and an evening of friendship for those that need in Nottingham. She's also a co-chair of the Interfaith Initiative for Single Mums called Sisters Noor, as well as representing Liberal Judaism on the steering group for Eco Synagogue. Rabbi Tanya is a chaplain to Rampton Hospital and its trusts around the country. She's a regular contributor to both Thought for the Day on BBC Radio Nottingham and the Faith column in the local newspaper Nottingham Post. When she gets time, and I don't know how she does, Rabbi Tanya's outside interests include spending time with her son and learning from others and the world. And last but by no means least is the inimitable Yehudith Fletcher, not a rabbi, but a leader, founder of Nachamu organization. Yehudith leads Nachamu's analysis of harm arising from extremism in the Jewish community, and she shapes Nachamu's advocacy and policy response. Yehudith has a background in project management and development. She works as an independent sexual violence advisor for Migdal Emunah and as a student of social policy at Salford University. Yehudith began writing as a child and is now a regular contributor to community and national papers, actually. In 2018, her poem Kina, from a survivor of child sexual abuse, won the Simon Rakua Award. Yehudith took part in the Susie Bradfield Women's Leadership Programme at the London School of Jewish Studies, is a graduate of the UJA's Manchester Leadership Programme, and is on the current cohort of the Dangor Senior Leadership Programme. So welcome all. As you can see, we've got a real powerhouse here. It's really an honour to be moderating this panel. So I'm going to come to all of you for comment on a first question that I'd like you to think about. So can you give us a sense of how interfaith work has played a part in general in your rabbinate or leadership role? And then maybe a little bit about COVID as well, how things might have changed during COVID. So I think I'm going to turn to you first, Rabbi Robin, if you could give me a bit of thought about that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Liz. And really gorgeous to be here with everyone on the panel and to be at LJ Biennial. It's one of my favourite spaces. So I'd say that interfaith has really played a part in my rabbinate because of two reasons. I'm going to say one, because of Manchester, the context of Manchester, and Yehudis can back me up on this, the particular nature of Manchester, and a project that I've been involved with many progressive rabbis and rabbis across the denominations of Tselem, which is a social justice rabbinic cantorial body, which was founded when I was a student rabbi. And we have tried from the beginning to make sure it's cross-denominational. So I've been thrown into the world of how to do interfaith work from that vision of having an organized body of rabbis and cantors leading on social justice. In the context of Manchester, what's very interesting about Manchester is on the surface, on the formal level, there is very little collaboration, although that's changing, between different denominational leaders. However, on an informal basis, everyone's family is a mix of congregants from different communities, and their practice in a lot of the modern Orthodox and Reform spaces are almost the same. in those two areas. So they really overlap. But it is changing. There's a Manchester Jewish strategy group that has been born during COVID. And that's an example of something that's probably only been possible because of COVID, which is an absolute spectrum of all areas of Manchester Jewish communities sitting in a space together, which has never happened. And I think is quite unique actually nationally as well.
Wow, that's very inspiring. I will come to Yehudis now just because you're the other member of the Manchester community. So it'd be interesting to hear how you reflect back on what Rabbi Robin said.
Thank you, everybody. It's so awesome to be here today with people that I know already and people that I look forward to getting to know better. Rabbi Robin in particular is a model to me for interfaith. It was about 3 years ago, I think, when I said, I'm looking for someone to learn Torah with, and Rabbi Robin said, I'll learn Torah with you. And so there we were from Manchester's Haredi community and the rabbi of Manchester's Reform community getting together for a chavrusa. And if that's not interfaith, I don't know what is. I in particular have an enormous amount to learn from other communities. And I think sometimes the Haredi community is portrayed in a way that either has everything to teach other communities or nothing to teach other communities. And there doesn't seem to be that kind of middle space of kind of just seeing each other as other Jews and perfectly imperfect. And I think that's what my voice maybe brings to the interfaith conversation, that we have something to learn from you and we would like to learn it. And who is we, I think, is often the question. And it's about making sort of challenging people to see Haredim in a way that previously they haven't, and also challenging ourselves to look for learning outside of the Haredi community.
I think that's interesting. I think, just looking at the events of the past, very tragic events of the past few days in Israel, made people, really engage with the Haredi community in a different way, in the way that sometimes doesn't happen. It was very lovely to see people queuing up in Tel Aviv to give blood. That was sort of very inspiring for me. Moving on to Rabbi Erin from London.
Yes, from London, and London is my surname also, for real. It is also a pleasure to be here and so excited. I would say that intrafaith work has been something that I've been engaged in, I don't know, maybe for as long as I could remember, even way, way, way before I even knew that I could become a rabbi. My first encounter was at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, where I grew up. We had a teen council of active members of the different youth movements, NCSY, which was the Orthodox movement, BBYO, the American equivalent of FZY, the American equivalent of Netzer, and we sat together and created programming so that we can interact and learn with each other. And while I was in rabbinical school, I started rabbinical school in Israel, I co-founded with two women who are studying in the Israeli counterpart of HUC, the Reform Rabbinical College, an interdenominational Beit Midrash, where a group of us would meet monthly for about 3 years, and actually continued after we finished, to learn with each other and to learn from each other. And I even brought that along with me when I moved back to America. And when I think also about my work as a chaplain, I worked and continue to work with all people of all faiths, and also all Jewish backgrounds. And interacting with my colleagues from the different backgrounds. And I think that it's definitely part of my ethos. Even currently, I'm working for Reform and Liberal Judaism, creating a volunteer pastoral care training program. And for me, we need to be able to learn with each other, interact with one another as much as possible. That would be my ideal part of my rabbinate.
That's really inspiring. It's really lovely to how you're coming to liberal and progressive Judaism to do that in some way at the moment. Coming to you, Rabbi Tanya, who I'm delighted to meet today and also hope to get to know better.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this exceptional panel, including you, Liz. But I would like to say that I actually stepped in instead of Rabbi Rebecca Burke, who unfortunately is not well at the moment. So I just would like to say that we wish Rebecca refuah shlema. We really miss you and hope that you will be with us very soon. Going back to the question, I've really enjoyed getting to know the Orthodox Rabbi in Nottingham, who is Rabbi Paris, and having an opportunity to cooperate with some Orthodox chaplains from Nottingham University over the Shalom Kitchen project. And also now it's such an honor for me to be a member of Ika Synagogue steering group, which includes a rabbi from the Masorti Synagogue, Judaism, and Orthodox Judaism, and Reform Judaism. So it's definitely a true intra-faith work, and I'm very passionate about intra-faith work, probably as passionate as about interfaith work, and I believe that we can do more about it. And I think this work has enriched my rabbinate and made me accept the diversity of Jewish expression, but also made me think about the place liberal Judaism plays in this diversity. I'm delighted that we have so many denominations within Judaism, and that Jewish people can choose their level of observance of traditional mitzvot, as well as having a diverse way to live their Jewish life and express their Jewish identity. So as faith leaders, I believe we've got to lead our way of respecting each other's identities, but also finding a way of working together.
Thank you, Rabbi Tanya. And it was interesting to hear how you felt that it enriches your experience of Judaism. Until recently, I was the director of the Council of Christians and Jews, and one of the reasons that I loved the job was because it was cross-faith, both on the Christian and Jewish side, and that was one of the most exciting aspects of the role. Going on to a more challenging question, I would say, what would you say, and I'll go to each of you in turn, are the pressing issues of inclusion within your own communities? And do you think they are relevant or more relevant for your or other communities? And I am going to start with Yehudis, if she could reflect on that.
Thank you. I think the question is in two important parts. What is the, what's the most pressing issues of inclusion? Orthodox Judaism, and particularly Haredi Judaism, is very good at accepting everybody as long as you conform. And it's that second, as long as you conform, that makes things difficult for anybody who doesn't conform, because whilst we're not cookie cutters of each other, and besides for different temperaments or different interests, there are always going to be internal minorities in a system that proudly upholds what it doesn't call the patriarchy. There's always going to be, anyone who's not part of, we're all part of the patriarchy, but anyone who's not got the most power within that system is going to be, paying the highest cost for inclusion. That said, if you do want to be included, it's very clear. The instructions are available for anyone who wants to read them. So I guess we balance this slightly difficult space of, yes, you can be included as long as you conform, and does that count as inclusion? I think for some people who are in my community really feel that and really subscribe to the fact that that is enough, that it's enough that the instructions for belonging are so clear, that makes it so accessible. But I can tell you that the struggle within is that not everyone conforms. Internal minorities consisting of women, of LGBTQ people, of people with different abilities will all struggle to be included. So that's the challenge that we face. Remind me what the second half of the question was, Liz.
Which are more relevant for your or other communities, would you say, in terms of inclusion?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming when thinking about this question, because we are conservative with a small c, right at that very end of the spectrum of who do we struggle to include. And I think that's probably one of the things our community is learning to do better and can learn from more liberal communities on how to do better. Having said that, I really must put it out there that we, and this is a point that I know isn't the easiest to hear, but we struggle to be included outside our community as well. And we need to be counted as part of the Jewish community. And when it comes to inclusion and talking about planning for the futures for the community, it's really important not to see this kind of binary of the Haredi community and the rest of the Jewish community, and to think positively and creatively and constructively about how to plan for the whole community, including all of its parts.
Can you think of a specific thing that other Jewish communities can do to reach out to the Haredi community? And maybe I'll let you dwell on that while I go to somebody else if nothing comes to mind immediately.
Yeah, I think it's just my strapline was Haredi people are people, and please see us as individuals.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to Erin to answer the same question. Would you like me to repeat?
So I think similar to what you just said of inclusion, there are lots of groups of people that are not always included in the best way, or if at all, within the community. And I do believe that there are some communities and that are working really hard to become more inclusive, whether that is for women, whether that is for abilities and disabilities, whether that is for LGBTQ+, whether that's for Jews of color. And it's really thinking about what can we do, where are our biases within, and how can we try and reach out and think, I would say also think creatively and also learn from one another. I think that's one of the big parts of intra-faith work that I love the most, is that we can watch what other communities are doing, because other communities are also doing well. And we can learn from each other, and some things we can implement. And it goes all the ways. And we can also learn from the things that communities aren't doing so well and try a different version of that. And the only real way for that to happen is if we're having conversations. We can't actually know what other communities are doing just from reading the newspaper, because as we know, that's not going to tell the whole story. That's not going to give us all the nuance. And so really striving to create a space that feels comfortable, that feels safe, that feels welcoming. And I think similar to what you just said, when you're dealing with a halachic tradition that is binding, and people believe that tradition needs to be followed, so then the way that conversation happens or has to happen is sometimes difficult, but I also believe that the conversation can happen, and there are ways to create more inclusivity even within the structures that are in place.
Thanks. It's really nice to see the idea of keeping the conversation going and not just, getting an image from the Jewish press or whatever it is, which can sometimes be divisive. So I very much like that approach. I'm going to come to Rabbi Tanya now to hear how she feels about this.
Thank you, Liz. I think liberal Judaism prides itself for being inclusive. I mean, that's the whole Biennial what's about. When it comes to inclusion, we have more extreme diversity in our opinions about Israeli politics than on inclusion and diversity in our communities. We were a part of a gay marriage campaign. We are having training to work with children and people with disabilities. I think in most of the communities now, mental health issues are at the top of our agenda, probably again in most of the communities. LGBTQ members can join liberal communities, and non-Jewish partners of our Jewish members are welcomed into our communities as well. Though I'm sure that within each of our community, there are individuals who might have a personal bias against some of the categories I have just mentioned. We probably can learn more about the history of such ancient groups as Sephardim and Mizrahim Jews as well. But despite all our efforts, we know we always can do more.
That's a lovely message. I also just wanted to say that Israel is a divisive issue, I think, whatever denomination you're in. Unfortunately, I don't think any of us have a monopoly on that one. But I liked your final word on that. And Rabbi Robin.
Great, thanks. I'm so loving this, by the way. I'm learning so much. It's just great. I think one of the challenges that I find as a community leader for a progressive community is that our strapline is that we're inclusive and welcoming. Like, as Rabbi Larry Hoffman says, every progressive synagogue says that on their website, right? And actually, to live up to that ideal is incredibly difficult. I would say this is like the one main topic that keeps me up at night as a community rabbi. How can we embed within our communities inclusion? And that's because, as Yehudis was saying, that my community and every community, the synagogue structure is ultimately a patriarchal model, and patriarchy and white supremacy are like at the heart of it in the way it's structured. So I feel like constantly we're working against that to embed a culture that is open, that is transparent, and that is accountable, which I would say are the main pillars of an anti-patriarchal, anti-racist community. And that's really hard. I think one of the hardest things about the pressing issue of inclusion that I find is that we say we're welcoming, we're progressive, we're inclusive. And what that can sometimes stop us doing is drawing the boundaries that we need to make sure the space is inclusive. Sometimes you have to exclude to be inclusive. And I've definitely seen that in our community and in myself, the challenges of having to be brave to step up and say, actually, the way that you are talking to that young woman is highly inappropriate. And I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to step back or whatever it is. And being very brave in my role of actually stepping into that conversation and knowing that I have to be alongside the community leaders, the gatekeeper or someone holding on to the values and saying, here's where the line is for us to be inclusive. And it feels really counterintuitive. There are so many pressing issues that I would talk about disability. One thing that we are, I think a lot of communities are struggling with, which is a reflection of society, is about really being inclusive and open and not heteronormative around LGBTQIA. And certainly in my community, we're going on a learning curve of like, what is the new language? How do you create safe, open spaces where people can learn, hear each other and have open conversations? That's like one particular thing, but I'll stop there because I could go on.
Yeah, and I could probably listen to you forever, Robin. It's lovely to hear how you're trying to create inclusion while sometimes knowing that you have to pull people back to explain how the impediment to that. Going to Rabbi Tanya first, do you find you're ahead of your community on issues of inclusion? And if so, how do you take them with you? And maybe also refer to Nottingham community specifically.
Well, I hope that as religious leaders of our communities, we are leading the way by personal example when it comes to inclusion. I have faced some biased opinions about certain minority groups from some of my members. And I even had to confront my own bias when I recognized them as such. And as I said, this work is not finished yet. There is always more we can do. But certainly when we as leaders pave the way, the community follows. And it's about continuing what we've started. And there is no end to it, really.
It's good to hear that you say there's no end, that you're always on trajectory of change and improvements. I wonder if Rabbi Erin would like to comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an Orthodox rabbi who's also a woman, which is both wonderful and complicated. And I would say that there are members of my community who think this is the most amazing thing in the world. And I think that there are members of my community who think that this is the worst thing that could ever happen. And so it's both. It's both and not every part of the community is ready or accepting for women rabbis or female clergy or female religious leadership, however you might have that title. But I do think that it's, how do I take people with me is just being myself and meeting more people and interacting with more people and allowing people to ask questions. I say that people, as if someone genuinely wants to know and learn, I'm open to almost every single question that they might ask me about what does it mean to be a female Orthodox rabbi. And I think that's the only way that we can learn, and is by having these conversations. And it's about meeting, it's about teaching, it's about interacting, and hoping that change will happen soon.
Well, thank you for that, Rabbi Erin. You expressed that with such patience and grace, because obviously you are on the cutting edge of this at the moment and almost in the eye of the storm with some people. So thank you for that response. Can I come to you, Rabbi Robin, to reflect on this?
Yeah, so I definitely think that my role as a leader is to continually learn and continually challenge myself. In the words of Rabbi Judith Rosenberry, one of my teachers and liberal Judaism's greats, she says that Judaism is the deconstruction of oppressive meta-narratives. And I've always held that like very deep in my being of what it is my role as leader, to always question, to be a critical thinker and hold on to that vision. That's my role as a rabbi, and to see the potential in the people and processes around me, as Brené Brown says. However, I would say that I learn far more from my congregants. I love it when I am agitated by congregants in a good sense, that they will call the community out, call me out and say, actually how you introduced around pronouns, for example, really made me uncomfortable. Okay, great. Let's have a conversation. Teach me. We've got a member who's a BSL, British Sign Language interpreter. I have been on a complete learning curve about how we make sure we're a capital D, small d inclusive community. I love that. I think one of the challenges I have of being held to account in that way is being a woman. Is I find it very difficult sometimes to distinguish when I'm being held to account and it feeling like I'm being shamed and it's affecting my worth. So I'm working really hard. I'm just being able to have those conversations around inclusion without getting defensive, without thinking that it's a slight on me or my values, but actually being able to open up, open-hearted and say, great, teach me. And again, that's dismantling the patriarchy. To understand that I as a leader am over here leading the way, knowing it all is not how I want to lead. I'm a learner, and what I want to model is learning, openness, and rectifying mistakes. Brené Brown says we're not here to be right, we're here to get it right. We're on a journey with it.
That's a really lovely response, to learn from every experience. And I have to say, I travelled with Rabbi Robin to Israel and Palestine a couple of years ago, and wow, what a critical thinker. And we all had to be on our toes all of the time, but always ready to learn from every voice that we met. Going to you, Yehudith, how would you respond to this?
I think I'm often positioned as, well, with a kind of symbolic violence, like, oh, here's a Haredi woman that we agree with. So this is a Haredi woman that we're willing to listen to. And it's not true. We should be really willing and open to include everybody in the Jewish community. And when we're talking about building resilient and sustainable communities, it's about, everybody counts, and not just the people whose values immediately match our own, and not just the people that we enjoy listening to, and not just the people that we click with. And I think that's been a struggle for me, trying to make sure that people outside my community really understand that I am not unique. I mean, I'm one of 7 children, and like my sisters might cover their hair differently to how I do, but we're built with the same core material and we hold the same core values. And, my family is one of thousands and thousands of families. And absolutely, certainly there are bad things done by people in my community. And certainly and without any kind of justification, there are bad systems in my community as well. But that doesn't mean that people in my community are bad people. It means that there's lots for us to learn, and there's lots of room to grow. And certainly we are here to get it right. And there are plenty. Yes, it's true that I'm saying things out loud around social justice, around human rights, particularly around forced marriage, that other people in my community haven't said out loud before, but I am pushing at an open door. And I don't claim to represent anyone, but it's important to know how many people's voices are being spoken through mine, and that I am far more representative than people understand me to be.
Thank you. I think what's common to all the responses was how much you all want to learn from every aspect of your community and your communal members, even where it's difficult to hear it. So that's very lovely to hear. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to open to the floor because there are just masses of questions coming in. They're all very challenging. So just maybe a quick response to this one. When you look at other denominations and think, wow, what is that wow about? What is the wow thing that you would like that you could take from somewhere else? So Rabbi Tanya, what would wow you?
Well, I certainly admire Chabad's approach to hospitality, and I really like what Yehudis and Erin said about having conversations. Erin said about having conversations, and that again we can learn much more from each other, and not just from the news which reach us, but actually by building connections and building relationships. And really interesting, Mike Beryl, I just go just a little bit off the topic, but Mike Beryl from Elstree just made a comment which came up at the first question, that intrafaith work is harder, I'm summarizing it now, than interfaith work. And I think as much as we invest in interfaith work and we really make an effort to get to know people of other faith, we probably need to make the same effort to get to know other denominations of Judaism, to build relationship and connections with members of other denominations within our faith. But what is interesting about Chabad in it, that I used to entertain a lot of people, and I have a very small house, and sometimes I was squeezing up to like 30 people there, and people will be having dinner sort of on the stairs, on the floor, and it's always was lovely atmosphere. But I actually really struggle to both, cook the food and to continue with my rabbinic duty, so to say, including writing a sermon, for the morning after Shabbat. And I love having, people all over my house, members of my community, so wonderful. But then clearing up, I have to say, it takes just as long. And I know that most of the Chabad rabbis, they have a partner by their side who take that role on of hospitality. But it feels to me that as progressive community, we can do more of opening our houses and entertaining, and because it's such an important mitzvah.
That's lovely. That's a lovely response. I'm going to go to Rabbi Erin. What's the wow factor for you elsewhere?
A bunch of things. I would say. Yeah, I think two things come to my mind. One is the central notion of tikkun olam and being able to pray with one's feet. And I think that is also part. It's not just sitting and learning in the Beit Midrash, but it's actively going out, and that is also integral. And I would say also conversations about spirituality, I think happen much more, at least from my experience, in more liberal spaces, and being able to interact and connect and talk about God or connecting with a higher being. And I would love to have that language be part of my learning, my community's learning.
Thank you. Rabbi Robin.
So I'd say two wow things that I would like to learn from or take in. So I think, although, liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism, we often like to say, as one, I think there are differences in how we express our Judaism, but also how the institutions work. And I loved being an LJ student, Rabbi. Loved it, loved the communities. LJ has a really clear clarity and focus, and the synagogues are much more a movement and as a whole. And I think in Reform Judaism, we struggle. I think that we are can be more affiliated to a movement. And I struggle with that. So I love LJ's clarity of focus and vision. I think from halachic Jewish practice and organizations, the thing that I struggle with and think about quite a lot is the fact that we don't have duty inbuilt. Erin said earlier, binding, right? Halacha is binding. There's a duty. A minyan, for example, right? You turn up because we need 10 people, 10 men, 10 people to pray, to come to a cemetery for a funeral. We don't have that inbuilt, and we don't, I think, generally in progressive Judaism, have a really clear post-halachic theology. So what is it that makes somebody go to a cemetery to stand with a mourning family? And I've been in situations where there's been 3 of us and part of my soul has died. So how do you do it? Because it's the right thing. Is that enough? How do you build in duty into what we do? And I think there's an opportunity there for us to find a third way where actually you do it because it's meaningful and you're duty bound. Somewhere in between. So anyway, that's something that I think it would be really great to explore more.
That's a really fascinating question, which I will need to reflect on further, I think, how you build in duty. Coming to you, Yehudith.
I think I'm just going to really turn what Rabbi Robin said back to her. Sometimes in Haredi Judaism, there is an overfocus on duty and the people get left behind. I was talking to someone about this the other day, about how there's a kind of outsourcing of morality sometimes. If you're not, if what you do is entirely constructed by duty, it's quite easy to build a rationale for things where you don't have personal accountability or responsibility. So my rabbi told me to do it, is not a good reason for forcing your daughter into marriage, or denying your child access to education, or some of the other human rights abuses that occur at higher numbers than we wouldn't be comfortable with anything. And I don't want to say it's common, but it's systemic abuses that occur in the community can be rationalized by saying, oh, this is not something I need to take personal responsibility for. And that's something that I've seen outside the Haredi community, within other denominations, is this kind of personal motivation that is values driven, that makes people stop and think, no, what is the right thing for me to do right now, and really take that responsibility for their actions, as it broadens into tikkun olam. But we're not just talking about tikkun for the whole world, we're talking about also tikkun for our personal worlds, our families and our communities that we live in.
It's really interesting to hear you speaking after Rabbi Robin, hear the flip side of that there. Just that nugget in itself was a wonderful interchange. So before I go to my really wow question, I'm going to take some questions from the floor. So you'll have to wait for my final wow question, which will come towards the end for all of you. So I've got some really challenging questions from the floor, but we can grapple with that, can't we? So I've got a question from Sophia Woodley. She said she'd be interested to hear how the participants feel conversion impacts interdenominational collaboration. Well, that's a biggie. Are there issues collaborating with other Jewish communities that might not recognize converts as Jewish? And I'm going to come to you first, Erin, to hear, and I know it's challenging. Try and grapple with that.
My initial answer to that is it shouldn't. My second answer, as I'm thinking about it, is I think it depends on what we're trying to do as in our intra-faith work. If it's about learning from each other, if it's about collaboration, if it's working on projects together, I can't imagine why that should be or could be an issue. And so that's my initial answer. And when it comes into particulars of it becomes more complicated, can become more complicated based on people's beliefs of conversion. But I actually believe that we should be there's a larger question about how conversions are being done, I would say. I can speak from the Orthodox community, or from my understanding of what happens within the Orthodox community, of things can and maybe should change in the global picture. But very I guess simple answer is no. We can work together and do things together.
And Yehudis, would you like to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think it's something that comes up as an issue. Certainly, I was brought up in Glasgow, being told that some people just aren't Jewish, even though they say they're Jewish, and don't believe them when they say that they're Jewish. And that was the narrative that was my starting point. I think I'm less interested now in who other people think are Jewish and who behaves Jewishly, and thinking about people being created in B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, with, even if it's a person who I disagree with, there will always be something that I can learn from them. There's always going to be some kind of kinship that I can have from them, as long as we recognize ourselves as both working towards the same ideals, and more people than you think are working towards the same ideals as you are, and certainly as I am.
Thank you both. Is there anything you'd like to add, Rabbi Robin, to that? And then I'll turn to Rabbi Tanya.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question from Sophia. I think conversion really impacts. I think it's all very well and good to have the fluffy intra-faith, we're working to the same thing and we can do it. Actually, this is a place where there's so much tension and so much hurt. In our Reform community in Manchester, certainly a lot of people's story is that they couldn't find a home within Orthodox Judaism, that they might have been members of a synagogue for generations. Their father's been president, and yet they find someone they fall in love with who wants to convert, and there's suddenly not a home, and they come to Reform Judaism or the Jackson's Ray Synagogue. And certainly we've got like a label of that. That's what it is to be Reformed Jewish. It's when you can't, find a home. That's not the full story at all.
No.
But I think it impacts on our identity. And when I came to Manchester, everyone kept saying to me, "Oh, so and so, they Magayahed. They Magayahed, he Magayahed." And it was kind of a joke for me because everyone wanted to tell me about someone who had converted, right? That they were the ones who had married out, or in that horrible phrase. I think it really impacts on identity. And as Sophia said about interdenominational collaboration, certainly this becomes an issue with burial. We find this in Manchester that I'm trying not to out, I don't want to do Lashon Hara, but there are certain spaces when someone's conversion status will then come into play. So there's like beautiful collaboration around everything, and then all of a sudden, did they convert? And then it's a separate category. And for me, that's so not okay. And I want to really kind of, it's a great question, a lot more to discuss on it, but I think it's a huge issue.
Yeah, before I come to Rabbi Tanya, just to say that it was interesting what you were saying about how some people end up in the progressive community because they don't know where to fall. And I'm just thinking of my own husband, whose father was Ukrainian Orthodox and his mother was a Jewish Polish Holocaust survivor. But of course, she had completely assimilated after the Second World War, like a lot of survivors. And had it not been for progressive Judaism, particularly Margaret Jacobi, he would not be in the Jewish world today, because he was very much welcomed. I'm not saying he wouldn't have been welcomed by other communities, but there definitely is that sense that, it's easier entry point. Rabbi Tanya, have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, very quickly, because I completely agree with Robin on that. And I do think that conversion does impact on our interdenominational collaboration. But what I would like to point out is also how lucky we are to be living today. Because I think recently what we've seen is that kind of quite a phenomenal. Like today, for example, on our panel, we have a member of the Haredi community. We have a lovely rabbi who is Orthodox, but also works with the progressive Judaism. And the fact that particularly in Nottingham, for example, the liberal community is so strong that the Orthodox community has to take us seriously. So I think this quite a historic moment, and I would like to acknowledge it, that more denominations within Judaism recognize the importance of collaboration. I'm not suggesting that we're going to move any further in terms of conversions, because it's a very big, very difficult issue indeed. But I do think that the historic moment of our moment is we start slowly moving towards definitely collaborations between different denominations certainly within the UK. And as I said, Ike Synagogue is one of those examples.
Okay, I'm going to ask a specific question to Yehudith and maybe to Rabbi Aaron, and then I'm going to ask my wow question. So we've got a question from Robert. How would the panel educate Haredi and other communities that struggle with inclusivity, how to understand the core values of progressive Judaism? So let's start with Yehudith. What are your thoughts there?
I think it's hard to go out with a mandate to convince somebody else of your point of view, and I would question. I mean, that I understand that that's what a lot of people want, but I would question whether that's constructive. I think if that is your core belief, and you hold, and Robert hasn't. I think, yeah, inclusivity is what he's saying is the core value. But I think going out and trying to convince someone else to agree with you is just not the way to get other people to agree with you. I think a starting point that other people are respectable human beings, a starting point of boundaries, so saying what values we will and will not accept in our space, and being Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations, and projecting those values outwards is the way to go. You know, like my mind is filled with mishle right now, like all kinds of things to little tiny snippets of Jewish learning that project inclusivity, project possibility, and all that. There's so much of these core values of inclusivity within Orthodox doctrine. Like, it's all there. You don't need to convince other people of your point of view. You need to just project your point of view outwards, and they will find it within their own doctrine. They'll come and find you.
You got some great comments supporting you on that, Yehudith. And a quick word from Erin before I ask a final wow question. And just to say that there are so many amazing questions here. Maybe there's some way that the Biennial can capture them and have a conversation about some of them later, because some of them are very challenging but important. Erin.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Yehudith just said. We can't force someone to accept another set of values. But maybe it is it's not about forcing someone to accept the values, but maybe it's learning with others from other communities and doing a learning session on what are values. And each community shares some of their values with each other. And so then it's a shared learning. It's not forcing, because that doesn't work well.
Okay, I think we're soon going to be out of time, so I want to ask the key question. As women, is there something specific that we bring, and as women leaders, and as Jewish women leaders, something specific that we bring to the area of inclusion? Over to you, Rabbi Tanya.
Definitely, I'll try to be quick. Just by being women in leadership positions, which is still sometimes a struggle to accept, not only within the Jewish community, but also worldwide. We bring that sense of diversity and inclusion to what used to be single gender role. And just recently, couple of years ago, and certainly on a few big online events, I've been challenged as a woman rabbi, and a lovely Orthodox gentleman was very nice to me at the World Jewish Relief dinner until he found out that I'm a rabbi, and then it was a completely different story. So there is still a lot of bias out there, and our work is not finished. And we also, as women, hopefully lead the way to greater diversity and its acceptance within our communities.
Okay, Rabbi Robin, we've got 2 minutes apparently, but this is really important to hear.
I'll be really quick. I think as women, if we can inhabit our status, as Rabbi Sheila Shulman Zichronah Livracha used to say, as insider outsiders, we have so much to bring. And Hannah Arendt, the political theorist, called it being conscious pariahs. If we can inhabit what it is to be marginal and liminal, to stand in that space of what it is to be included and excluded, we have such a power between us to change the structures and each other. So as women, we're in that already, as many other like different minorities and identities are. So to really inhabit and activate that liminal status or the experience of being excluded.
Thank you. Rabbi Erin.
Very similar to Rabbi Tanya and Rabbi Robin, of holding those spaces, recognizing and remembering our times of not inclusion. I've seen in the comments a lot of people talking also about marital status and not being included or feeling excluded. And that is a huge part of something that's important to me as also a woman. What does it mean when a woman is not married, especially in the Orthodox community? And so just keeping that in our mindsets, and because that's part of my existence.
Thank you. And Yehudith.
Thank you. I think there's often an over-reliance on women to set the tone and an expectation that women will do the right thing. So whilst I have that requirement and standard that I hold for myself, I think it's really important not to look to women in leadership positions to set that tone and lead the change, and to continue to expect a really high standard of leadership across the community.
So I just want to thank you all. I think you all set an exemplary examples of how we can all do inclusion better. And it's been very, very inspiring. And I'm sure we could continue the conversation for quite a long time with such wonderful women. But I know that we're going to have to close soon. So just a very big thank you to the Biennial for allowing us to have this conversation. And as I said, there were some fantastic questions that we didn't get to. And if there's some way that, we can share them after with some of the speakers so they can offline continue, that'd be fantastic. I think we are now going offline.
Really was something. It was really, really great to hear the discussion, because it's so important for our interdenominational people to talk and take a lead on social action. I was delighted to hear what they were all saying, particularly on disability and inclusion. It was great.
I personally found it such a moving panel, Owen, really, to not only know that on Biennial we create women. I certainly am going to be holding on to the conscious pariah that Rabbi Robin talked about, and how we inhabit those marginal and liminal spaces. I really appreciated the discussion. And what a place to start our day, Owen. Really an exciting beginning to what is coming up next. And we in a moment going to hand over to Rabbi Leah, but we also have lunches and learns where there's some important information, Owen. People need to register. That was your cue. People need to register if they want to attend the lunch and learns. So please, if you would like to attend our lunch and learns, we've got 3 of them today, one with Rabbi Alexandra Wright, one with Rabbi Margaret Jacoby, and one with Rabbi Richard Jacoby and Mitch Sampson. If you want to attend those amazing lunch and learns, you do need to register, because they won't be streamed and we need to send you to the Zoom access. I think we're ready now to hand over to our next session and to Rabbi Leah.
Hi, everybody. Hi,
Good
Charley.
morning.
Hi,
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm ready to go. I'm excited to be at Biennial. How are you both?
Very good. Thank you.
Pretty good. And I'm looking forward to this next bit, particularly because it's an interesting thing for me, because I've always seen myself as outside the establishment, yet I work within the establishment, which is
Right.
a contradiction. But take it away, Leah.
Thank you so much, Owen. So that was Owen Power. For those of you that don't know, who's my co-chair. I'm Rabbi Leah Jordan, the other co-chair of Biennial. The two of us, together with a whole team, co-programmed this weekend. I hope you're enjoying. It's really wonderful to see it all happening, to see all the discussions and the following through of our theme, breaking down walls. I think that's been a fascinating way to get into some more interesting, hopefully even some more spicy discussion. As I was talking with our panelists backstage for this next panel, we would like to bring you something to chew on and to really think about. So this next panel is going to be, I'm just going to be asking questions and I'm going to be the moderator as co-chair of Biennial. And the panel is 4 wonderful speakers who I'm very excited for you to get to know. The panel itself is billed as creating British Jewish community outside the establishment, which, as Owen just pointed out, is an interesting concept because, of course, I think it could tokenize toward our panelists or toward the establishment both ways, right? Where is the line? What is the establishment? And I think that's part of the question we're going to be asking here in Breaking Down Walls. As Owen said, he's always seen himself on the outside and yet works from within. And I think in various ways, all of our panelists will be able to speak to that about creating Jewish space and what Jewish spaces are we creating. It's very much the question, I think, also of this weekend. So I just wanted to tell you who our 4 are going to be before they show up with their lovely faces. We have Morgan Lev Edward Holleb, the co-founder of the Pink Peacock Cafe, a queer anarchist Yiddish cafe in Glasgow, Scotland. And Morgan is indeed going to be with us today from Glasgow. Tomer Spence, who is a founding member of Na'amod, a movement of anti-occupation British Jews that is also creating social and spiritual Jewish community. Dex Grodner, the founder and host of queer Jewish cabaret, Homos and Houmous. And Charley Katan, the co-founder and musical director of Veranenu, a grassroots egalitarian musical community. And we're very excited to have all 4 of them here today to talk about who they are and what brought them to the creation of these Jewish spaces across Britain and what we can learn from them and also be challenged by in their experiences creating these spaces. What is liberal Judaism doing to intersect with these spaces? How are we in relation to what's going on in the larger British Jewish community that they're all bringing? Good morning, everybody.
Hiya.
It's wonderful to have you. So I think what we're going to do is have the panelists introduce themselves and then talk a little bit about each of their projects or what hat they're wearing in speaking about this topic. And then we'll go into the more nitty-gritty of what are these projects addressing, do they feel that we could learn from? And I hope there will be some time for questions. So however you're watching this, if you put into whatever chat function you have, whether that's on various platforms that you're watching this streaming or in the Zoom watch party, put questions in and they will be filtered over to us. Some of them might pop up on the screen actually below, and we will try to get to some of those questions as well. Hopefully there'll be a bit of back and forth also with everyone who's watching. So just for the first question, I would really love you each to introduce yourself. How would you introduce yourself? And what is your project that you're coming to speak to us about? So with no real order, let's go to Dex first. Hi, Dex.
Hiya. Thanks, Leah. My name is Dex Grodner, and I am here in the capacity of Homos and Houmous, a queer Jewish cabaret started in 2016 in London. And I'm really interested in Yiddish culture, the sort of the East End of London, and sort of music hall. So the theatre history of Variety and Music Hall in vaudeville have always been so welcoming and open and diverse and sort of deeply Jewish, but also very secular in their thinking. So that's been something that has kind of tied in for me. I'm a drag performer. I perform under the name Hanukkah Lewinsky, and she's kind of the host of this cabaret night, sort of welcoming people into this world.
Thanks so much, Dex. I know that specifically we would love to have Hanukkah Lewinsky host. I'm sure she's very booked actually around Hanukkah time, in part because of her name. But LJ would love to be in touch specifically, I know, actually, about Hanukkah coming to host one of our Hanukkah parties. But I'm sure that's a busy time for you. So yeah, thank you for sharing us with that. I want to get more into it shortly. And can we go to Charley?
Sure, hello. So I'm Charley. I am currently in the midst of finishing up a master's degree in migration studies, where I basically spend a lot of time thinking about the Jewish diaspora and how we form that. And I'm here to sort of represent Veranenu, which is a grassroots egalitarian musical community, which we set up a couple of years back to celebrate Kabbalat Shabbat specifically through music and song and build a community around that. And I'm here in the capacity of sort of representing that community. I was involved in sort of founding it, but we don't really have a sort of strong hierarchy. I just am the person who is representing it today. Yeah, and I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks so much, Charley. Yeah, I want to hear more about that specifically at some point about how has that been in pandemic and how have you been able to meet or not meet, and yeah, what's going on with all of these projects. I think and I know with Veranenu, there's been I think questions around like how do you do it and how does it go forward. I hope that we get into that more. Let's go to Tomer.
Hi, I'm Tomer, and yeah, I'm kind of a returning liberal Jew. I grew up in North London Progressive Synagogue, which evolved into the congregation that Leah now leads, Gael in North London. And I'm here in my capacity as a founding member, again, along with Leah, of Na'amad, which is a movement of British Jews who are opposed to the occupation and to our community support for it. We're a cross-communal movement, so we have members right from the Orthodox end of the spectrum through Masorti, Reform, and Liberal, and of course secular Jews as well. And we're very much focused on kind of taking action to take a stand for freedom, equality, and justice for all Palestinians and Israelis, for everyone in the Holy Land, Israel, Palestine. But also around that, we've kind of created a very intentional Jewish space. We see kind of our Judaism and our Jewish identities as meshed up, joined in with our support for human rights for everyone in the region. And so, you know, that expresses itself in different ways, both through the campaigning that we do, but also just around creating Jewish community. And definitely there are it's really interesting people coming from such different Jewish backgrounds into this space where we're all working on a common cause. And it sounds like, yeah, everyone else in the panel has been doing that in different ways as well. So really looking forward to sharing this experience.
Thank you, Tomer. Yes, as Tomer said, I'm a founding member of Na'amad, and so it's the one of the four things we're going to talk about today that I have the most personal experience with. And I think what started me thinking about this, which is that I know that Na'amad was founded a few years ago for the specific purposes that you talked about, Tomer, and then also it's become a social and a spiritual space. And I'm just would be interested in, I think, the overlap between all of these spaces, that they're doing a lot of things and they're filling different needs, but actually I would be curious about what kind of culture and social Jewish space is being created around, and I think that that's kind of maybe at the heart, I would say, of some of them in some ways. And yeah, thank you for that. And last but not least, Morgan, tell us about yourself. Hi.
So I am a non-binary transsexual anarchist Jew. I'm calling in from Glasgow, which is where my project is. So I am one of the co-founders and one of the board members of the Pink Peacock Cafe, which is, like you said, a queer Yiddish anarchist cafe that we're opening. We've got our premise and we are renovating it now, so that's what we're doing. But some of the other sort of like important notes that we hit is everything in the cafe is pay what you can down to zero. And it's like an anonymous pay system. So there's dignity in accessing food, regardless of what your income is. It's also a late night and a dry space. So it's an alcohol-free space, which makes it family friendly. Basically, it's a social, queer, and Jewish space where people can access Jewish life without, like, outside of shul and outside of private Jewish life. And then likewise, it's a queer space, which Glasgow just is in desperate need of more queer spaces that aren't nightlife spaces, which are also fabulous, of course. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the spicy, get into that with everybody. Because the other important thing about it is a queer and a Jewish space. Everybody is welcome except for cops and for TERFs. For anybody who doesn't know, that's trans folks who call themselves feminists. And we're also an explicitly anti-Zionist space. We are BDS compliant and we support Palestine in their pursuit for liberation.
Thank you so much, Morgan. I think hopefully we'll get into some more of all of that. I agree. I want to get into, the question I think of this biennial, which is how is liberal Judaism meeting the needs of the people who are within it, and how are we falling short, and how do we need to take account? And one of the reasons, very transparently, that I wanted to do this panel is because I feel like we're all part of a British Jewish ecosystem, and we all also are in different constellations of that. And I think there's a lot of synergy and overlap in some ways between the various spaces, and that also we need really to be challenged by each other. And I wanted especially to speak about that, which is to this next question, which is, what need or needs does the space you are creating and have created and are part of address that you felt weren't being addressed? And that is an important aspect that space brings. Can we go with you first, Charley?
Sure thing. So I guess the origin story of Veranenu came from experiences that I and a couple of friends had being part of the services of Nava Tehillah in Jerusalem for a couple of months, which we found to be radically different, I guess, to anything we'd experienced back home in the UK. And so when we came back, we had this idea of, what would it be like to create some kind of equivalent community where we were, which was in London, and how could we sort of build not only sort of really new and vibrant services, which would involve like new music from around the world, but also how could we build community kind of within that. It took a couple of years to get it off the ground. I think now, like sort of reflecting on what we did accomplish over the year or so pre-pandemic, where we were meeting once a month, I think the needs that we felt weren't being addressed, I think first of all were that there wasn't really a space for people to come together in a very sort of non-formal way, where they weren't being asked to really commit to anything other than just sort of, come to a service and enjoy it and give yourself to that. I think the specific way that we do services doesn't really assume any prior knowledge. So it will be melodies repeated over and over and over until sort of everyone catches on, everyone has the words with, transliteration, all of those different things. So that, you can come with having no prior experience of that prayer, as long as you're willing to kind of be part of the sort of communal voice, then that's something that would welcome you into it. Something else which I think was kind of unique, or something that I hadn't experienced before, was that we would we would ask for one person from the community each time, usually a different person, to guide the entire service. So it was open to anyone who had been to a Veranenu service before, could put themselves forward to sort of provide some kind of link or sort of drush, which went spread over the entirety of the service, to sort of guide the thing. And that was open to anyone. We've had rabbis, we've had complete people with no experience of those sort of leadership before, people who sort of bring poetry into it, people who bring commentary into it, all of these different things. And I think that has also been a really kind of special thing. And I say lastly is this very important kind of social aspect. So we would hold the services in different people's living rooms, whoever could host us. And what I think it sort of ended up being, and what I think we want to sort of reorient ourselves post-pandemic to be, is to create a network among people who are sort of doing the work in various capacities in various spaces, and giving them some kind of community, spiritual home that they can meet other people build really strong bonds and sort of go forward from that. So it's like a kind of recharging, incubating space, which is sort of derived from the liturgy of Kabbalat Shabbat. So yeah, I think those are sort of like the broad overview of where I think it was going, and where I think we sort of do something different.
Charley, really quickly to that, can you tell us a bit about Nava Tehillah in Jerusalem, and what about, like, if you've never been, what about that service was so striking that you wanted to bring? You know, what was British Jewish, you know, prayer missing that you felt like that added?
Yeah, okay, so Nava Tehillah services were sort of, the blueprint is that you have a ton of musicians playing all sorts of instruments, from sort of like cellos, guitars, mandolins, flutes, saxophones, all these sort of things going on. And they would sit in a concentric circle in the middle and then sort of radiate out of that, like with all the sort of congregation, like sort of, yeah, behind them. And their specific sort of way of going through a service is to focus on the Psalms, 7 Psalms, which are meant to be for one for each day of the week, and then culminating in L'Chadadi, and then Shabbat has entered, and that's wonderful. And there were parts of that where we really wanted to emulate. So that sort of 7 psalm structure, it had become like, is the thing that we use for Veranenu. And the sort of idea of having, you know, this sort of musical core where anyone who plays any instrument who wants to come and be part of that sort of musicians circle is welcome to do so. However, something that we sort of departed from them from a bit is that I used to play with them, and I felt like there was a sort of kind of like an ego-based thing around it. Like if you were in the musician circle, then you were kind of like had this sort of like celebrity status within the service, and I didn't really enjoy that. I feel like that was kind of like antithetical to the idea of like really communal spiritual leadership. And so we don't really segregate ourselves. We all just sit in one sort of big sort of mishmash and try to sort of decenter any one individual from, I guess, like the running of the service, apart from the person who's guiding it for that specific week, who could be anyone. So yeah, it's a lot of music, a lot of singing, a lot of dancing. Yeah, I think that's kind of how I would describe it.
Thank you so much. It's something that I certainly miss. I don't think we do enough of what you do in Britain, and yeah, I want to hear more about your post-pandemic plans for making this network. That's really exciting. Thank you, Charley. Morgan, to the same question.
So I think the biggest need that we identified in our neighborhood is economic. I live in a really diverse neighborhood. Glasgow is one of the cities where the Home Office relocates asylum seekers and refugees. So we have a lot of people from a lot of different places, and most of whom are not given the economic support from the government that they should have for basic dignity. So, and we wanted to make a space where people could access food without guilt or shame or stress around money. And we were told by lots of people that that wouldn't work, that if we just had free food, that people would take it all and run, or that we'd be overrun with like unhoused people, to which we said, like, great, that would be fabulous. That would be a real like mark of us being successful if that was the case. And so far those people have been wrong. We've managed to always break even when we do any kind of when we did food deliveries earlier in the pandemic, and we have an online shop right now while we get the space ready, and that's all pay what you can down to zero, including free shipping. And we've always managed to just like eke out money from that rather than be at a loss all the time. So that was like far and away the most important thing to us, was that we are accessible in terms of economic stuff. But we're also really focused on being accessible in lots of other ways too. So I mentioned before, like, we're a queer space. There just need to be more of those. So that's, and I can talk for a long time about that. We're also like a physically accessible space. We're building a physically accessible, like, disabled toilet, which doesn't exist yet in our neighborhood, which is an absolute shanda. We're also spend a lot of time thinking about other access needs, like communication, whether that's through ESL or through different languages, or through writing stuff down. We think about like being autism friendly, because most of our board members are autistic. So that's actually something that's really easy for us to think about in terms of like lighting and sound and all this kind of thing. But then in terms of the Jewish stuff, which I think is probably what's interesting more than anything else to this audience. There are a couple of barriers that I think that most young Jews experience to accessing Jewish life, and I think one of those is the tacit or explicit Zionism of most Jewish establishment spaces. That's a huge barrier to people because we don't like to have to hold our nose about politics. But I actually think that's the smallest barrier. The second is that the assumption or expectation of experiencing discrimination. So as a queer person, if I go into a shul that I don't know, or I go into any kind of Jewish space that I'm not familiar with, I'm anticipating to be discriminated against, and whether that's fair or not isn't really the point. The fact that people expect the discrimination means that it's a barrier. And then the third one, which I think is actually the biggest barrier to people, is the sense of imposter syndrome. At least this is what I've noticed in my own communities, is that Jews who did not grow up with a traditional Jewish education, who did not grow up going to school, are afraid that they're not really Jewish enough to access Jewish spaces, whether that's because they're patrilineal, or whether that's because they don't read Hebrew, or they don't they're not familiar with the prayers or the holidays outside of Hanukkah or whatever. So that really informed how we made our space, or how we're making our space, to be really, really welcoming to those Jews who don't feel like they have a home somewhere else. And that's the experience of a lot of our board members as well. So it's peer led rather than feeling paternalistic. Yeah, I think we also just really wanted a social space that's explicitly anarchist and explicitly anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. And I could talk for a long time about anarchism, but I'll just say that it's such an important part of Jewish history, and especially of Yiddishkeit, which is where we sort of focus. But it's something that's denied to us in our learning, whether that be through traditional Jewish education or just general cultural omission. So we're really excited to be part of the Yiddishkeit anarchist revival, I guess you could call it.
Thank you so much, Morgan. So much there. I hope we get to circle around to some of them. Specifically, you were saying young Jews expecting discrimination going into spaces. I hope we can circle back around to that, and to imposter syndrome that you talked about. And yeah, the intersection that I feel would be really juicy if we have the time to come back to around what is this affinity between Yiddishkeit, as you call it, Yiddish culture or Yiddishness, and queerness and lefty politics, anarchism specifically. I think there's a lot I would love to look up more, hopefully, and hopefully it'll resonate with other people's projects here as well, other folks' projects. Let's move on to Tomer, speaking of Israel-Palestine and Zionist spaces, non-Zionist spaces. What's going on with Na'amod, Tomer? And yeah, what needs is it filling?
Yeah, so on the kind of the Zionist question, so we are a very broad-based movement, and we don't take a position on Zionism. So we welcome anyone who's a Zionist, a non-Zionist, or an anti-Zionist, whatever else they define as post-Zionism, as long as they kind of share our opposition to the occupation and our belief that everyone in Israel-Palestine should live in freedom, equality, and justice. Our existence definitely reflects, I think, the centrality that Israel holds in Jewish life today in the UK, but I think in all diasporas. And I think the kind of gap we fill or have filled, what drew people to create us and join us, is that I think there are a lot of people in the Jewish community who maybe feel that when it comes to Israel engagement, which happens so much, there's kind of an expectation or a requirement sometimes that you check some of your Jewish values at the door when it comes to talking about Israel. So, I think in most Jewish communities, and particularly in progressive Judaism, there's a lot of focus on human rights, for example, on equality, and supporting those initiatives being an expression of theology, of the idea, for example, that that Tselem Elohim, we're all created in the image of God, and we all have a shared humanity. And we do that in a lot of contexts, both in the UK and around the world. But I would say sometimes, if not often, that stops short a bit when it comes to Israel. And that's not to say that we don't ever talk about human rights when it comes to Israel, but I think it can be more withheld because of all sorts of structural and emotional and religious reasons than it is in other contexts. And I think for a lot of people in the community, that's really difficult. There's kind of a disconnect there. And I think I didn't grow up in a youth movement, but a lot of other people who founded and have joined NOW did. And I definitely think I hear a lot of stories from them about how, they were taught to hold and express certain values as part of their Judaism, but it was ring-fenced somewhat from the way they engaged with Israel, and which is, again, kind of a very central part of how they experience Jewish life. And I think that's something we've also seen recently around, there's been a lot of work in the Jewish community over the past year, in particular, thinking about our complicity in racism and aspiring to be anti-racists. And that's really important work. But again, sometimes it hasn't extended. I think there are many examples where it hasn't extended to racism expressed towards Palestinians, which unfortunately is quite widespread, I think, in the Jewish community. And so, yeah, there's something going wrong there, or some kind of disconnect, which, yeah, I know a lot of people in the community feeling, which is what the Jews now mod. And I'd say the other kind of gap we're addressing is that, again, when we talk about Israel-Palestine, the Jewish community, there is a lot of talk around peace, around wanting peace, around aspiring towards a two-state solution, which is what most British Jews support, and particularly more so in progressive streams, there is some talk about the occupation and the human rights violations that occur there. But that's usually as far as it goes in terms of just, talking about it. And it's kind of been the same words, same conversations for most of my life, certainly since probably the past 20 years after the Second Intifada. And that's, none of that has changed despite the context of the far right in Israel gaining power, gaining more and more power, the occupation becoming more entrenched, the prospect of some sort of just peace seeming further away than ever. And I think what NOW has done is we've said, we're not just going to talk about this, we're actually going to take action. And we've done that in a lot of different ways over the few years that we've existed. And I think, clearly that's spoken to a lot of people because there are people both inside and outside Jewish established life who have, kind of been drawn into us, who've joined us, who've attended one of our orientations, who've got involved in our campaigning, because, they really care about what's happening in Israel-Palestine, as, most British Jews do, or a lot of British Jews do. But they're not prepared to just kind of talk empty words about it and really want to put their money where their mouths are. And I think we're kind of one of the first entities in the British Jewish community to really offer a tangible way to do that. And the kind of the suffix I would add to those two examples is that I think clearly that's come from within people who are engaged in Jewish communal life and felt that something is missing a bit, and that things aren't being done in the ways I've discussed, that there's kind of gaps there. But also people, I think, who are outside Jewish communal life and are looking for a way in, but feel like the way that the established Jewish community engages with Israel is insufficient in some way and a barrier to them getting involved in Jewish communal life, which is certainly something I felt. I lived abroad as a teenager. I kind of felt my way back into the Jewish community being here in the UK as an adult, and that's certainly something I came across. And I think that's probably, again, where a lot of the spiritual communal side of NOW alongside our campaigning speaks to a lot of people and gives a bit of a home in the Jewish community, which they haven't been able to find elsewhere.
Thank you so much, Tomer. That's a lot of food for thought. I think some overlapping food for thought in some ways with some of the other panelists, and then also a very specific message, which I'm very glad that you are bringing and expressing so clearly. Thank you very much. On to the cabaret. Dex, can you tell us, what I loved hearing about the founding of Homos and Houmous from you, and I would love to know more about, what needs were you seeing that needed to be with this cabaret production? Dex.
Thanks. So when we founded Homos and Houmous, so in 2016, there was this real discourse, this line of thinking when people would talk about importance of safer spaces for people of color, as sort of spaces that were exclusive for people of color so that they could retreat, regenerate, heal, think, create, and then feel bolder and more empowered to step back into the broader political sphere, sort of energized and focused. And a backlash to that was coming this kind of rhetorical question, which wasn't necessarily coming from a particularly empathetic or uplifting place, but people would say, well, what about spaces for Jews? What about spaces for Roma and traveler communities? What about spaces for Polish people? And this wasn't being used as a point of solidarity. It was being used as a point of kind of separating, dividing, and undermining these different communities, which, frequently overlap in these different intersections. And so at the time, Homos and Houmous felt really important as a space for Jews to ask questions around what is our own responsibility to offering diverse voices, to offering a platform to a real range of people, and a platform to focus on their art and their individual voices. And I think that the cabaret form lends itself really well to this kind of speaker's corner or bulletin board form, where we're not actually all offering one cohesive voice. I grew up Reform, and then I spent my adolescence in an Orthodox school. So I did kind of get that really interesting mix of perspectives, and as well as gorgeous performance art and we're also grounded in this kind of socialist and anarchist tradition of klezmer and Yiddishkeit. So we have a lot of klezmer music and a lot of Yiddish singing as part of our performances. A regular performer on our lineup who's a really close artist as part of the events that have gone on for years is the British Palestinian performance artist and poet Rami Yasser. We've had a lot of speakers corner kind of approaches. The activist Dan Glass had gone and spent a lot of time with the LGBT communities in Russia and Poland who were living in so-called LGBT exclusion zones, and came back to share people's perspectives from those places and really outline what the needs were for solidarity going on there. So this kind of bringing together of quite down the line political commentary and needs with Yiddishkeit and music and a real range of voices. There was a fantastic singer and performance artist who performed at one of the very first shows, who is Catholic and a descendant of the Conversos, called Saint Terente. The Conversos is the Jews who were forced to convert to Catholicism in Spain. And it has just led to this amazing mix of voices. So something I think is really important as far as what the Jewish community should address and liberal Judaism could uphold is this real focus on art and art making as a liberatory strategy and as something that can uplift people, and that extending beyond. We're seeing a lot of fabulous workshops and a lot of fabulously inclusive events which allow everyone to kind of take part and share voices, and I think that's so important. But I also think that resourcing individuals and diverse individuals with enough support to be able to rehearse, to be able to develop new perspectives and voices, and actually come up with something really clear that they have been supported to do. I think this year has really shown quite how precarious artists are. And we've been continuing to put on the Homos and Houmous cabarets right through this year. We did a Purim spiel with Morgan and Pink Peacock, and it was fantastic. Raised a lot of money for Pink Peacock. But it has just shown that a lot of artists have fallen through the net of employment support this year and have been left really down and out. And I look through, funding resources and funding specifically within the Jewish community, and I think there's an excitement around projects which challenge anti-Semitism and which build community, but that rarely translates to anybody looking to actually fund artists to make and develop work. And I think that's so important and something that the liberal Jewish community should really get behind.
Thank you so much, Dex. I think the reminder specifically about artists in this past period and how important they are, and how much I wish I could go to the cabaret, and how I've wanted to attend, and really, God willing, hopefully will in future, and how much that space offers is a really important reminder. And in a perfect world, we wanted, as you know, Homos and Houmous to be our entertainment this evening. It'll happen one day when we've got their budget to rightly pay the artists what they should be paid, right? I think that's an important ask and demand that you're saying here now is, honor people for their work, especially artists and people, folks in the past year who that has been something that they have really fallen, as you say, through the net. Thank you so much for bringing that, and all the other fascinating things about why Homos and Houmous was created, what kind of space is it coming out of and responding to that was going on in a larger frame. Thank you. I wanted to ask some questions that kind of come from what the audience is asking right now, and that also I feel like are coming from this space. A lot of folks have written in and said, I feel like I'm an outsider and I'm an LJ, and I feel really interested in knowing from the panelists, what would be your message to us as liberal Judaism to do better? And so if that's something that you can speak to, what, if you could be your most spicy, as I invited everybody at the beginning, and it would tell us, what do we need to do better? And then also the other part of the question is, what in your project is the thing, and I know you all are thinkers like this, that you want to do better in the near future also? And I think around the question of inclusion specifically, but you can do whatever you want with that. So so what's your message to us? And what is it you're looking forward to doing in the next 3 to 6 months that is on the agenda for something that you need to be getting better and getting right? Is there anybody who especially wants to speak to that question first? Morgan, yes.
So my spiciest, but also just the most efficient way to be better about inclusion is to pay people to fix it for you. So if you're having an issue with oh, why aren't there queer Jews coming to my thing? Pay a trans person, I recommend, to sort you out. Don't pay Stonewall or Mermaids or one of these other big charities, because I've worked for them and you can do better than that by just hiring us directly. Get into my DMs and I'll do it for you. I could recommend loads of other people to do it for you. But this is true not just of trans stuff and queer stuff, but of anything about anti-racism, anything about accessibility, any sort of thing that falls under the heading of diversity and inclusion. You will not be able to do it yourself. Accept that and pay people to help you. Should I answer the second part of the thing as well, or I just want to got the mic if that's okay. I mean, this is maybe not quite in the spirit of what you asked, but the thing that we're going to be doing in the next couple of months is opening our doors, and that's it's really hard for us to focus on anything else. But I suppose in terms of our own bettering, inclusion, which is not my favorite word for describing dignity and self, empowerment and self-actualization. But we are really looking forward to working more with the a local community that we live with. So we're already doing lots of partnerships with the Romanian traveler community and with like other interfaith food justice projects and things like this. And then in the broader sense, we're doing lots of solidarity work with all kinds of lefties and queers across the diaspora. But I'm really, really excited for us to actually open our doors and see who is coming through and who is not coming through, and then fixing that. And this is something I think that will only happen once we actually do open the doors. But I want us to get, people working in the cafe who live here. Most of our board members do live in Glasgow, and most of them live in our neighborhood, but not all of them. And we actually don't have anyone on the board who is Scottish, which is a failure. And I want to get more locals involved. I feel like I want to say about, because I saw somebody had a question about this. This is just really nitty gritty. Like the way that we tell people how much they should pay for something is we tell them what the break-even price is, and then we encourage them to pay more or less. And I just wanted to say as well that we are a non-hierarchical, like workers collective. We're a community interest company, so we're not owned by the board members, but all of the board members are, all of the workers are board members, and we're governed entirely by the people who work there. And we will have a flat pay structure. We're not paying ourselves yet because we can't afford to. So you can jump onto our Patreon and sort us out so we can pay ourselves properly. But we do pay everybody that we work with in terms of like our like performers and careers and stuff. Yes, I will drop the mic now. Let other people talk.
That's great. Among several things that you said, pay your people. Pay people for the labor that they do. We don't want to be living in a capitalist system. I think most of us on this panel agree, but being that we do, pay your people for what they do. Yes, let's go to Tomer on the same question, please.
Yes, I think the kind of short answer to the question, based on the things I was talking about before, is to make sure that liberal Judaism is kind of acknowledging and educating on and responding to the reality of the occupation and the broader reality in Israel-Palestine, and centering Palestinians in that work, and kind of really having the courage to as a movement which is a Zionist movement which is connected to Israel and really cares about what's happening there, to kind of have the courage to live up to those values. And I would say that to any communal institution across the UK which has a relationship with Israel. And I think clearly there are people, again, within every communal institution, and that includes liberal Judaism, who feel like that isn't happening enough at the moment. So make sure those people are being listened to and empowered to lead the change that needs to happen. And I would just kind of tie that into a reflection I've had listening to some of the other sessions throughout the biennial, which is that I think liberal Judaism rightly is very proud of kind of the strides forward it's taken throughout its history on inclusion, whether that was through welcoming in mixed faith families and patrilineal Jews many decades ago, through to being kind of pioneering inclusion of queer Jews, and many other examples as well. And I think it's like I said, liberal Judaism is right to be proud of that. It's one of the reasons why I'm proud to associate with liberal Judaism. But I think it's important when we talk about those developments, we always remember that they came too late, that there were people who, before those changes were made, people who were excluded from liberal Judaism and probably lost from Judaism altogether. And so we need to be really thinking now, like, what are the changes that we need to be making now that whenever we do make them are going to have come too late, and we're going to have lost people and not lived up to our liberal Jewish values in the interim period. And there's always resistance to making change, and the sooner that we embrace the change that needs to happen, the better it'll be for everyone. In terms of the second part of your question around what Now Mod is doing to pioneer or be more inclusive ourselves? Again, it's a really important question. Every institution and organization and group needs to challenge themselves on it. We're certainly, like the rest of the Jewish community, been thinking a lot about how we fulfill our aspiration to be anti-racist over the past year, and in the wake of the Board of Deputies report on racial inclusivity. We do have Jews of many different backgrounds and ethnicities in Naamod, but we, like the Jewish community as a whole, are kind of skew Ashkenazi centric. We also skew towards the progressive end of the Jewish community, even though we do have members from across it. And I think it's really important that we don't get trapped in a silo like that, and we welcome in anyone from across the community, religious background or not. Also I think as a kind of volunteer-run group, it is hard for people. We have a lot of people joining us who want to be involved in our campaigning and in our cause. And as a movement with a very small budget, with no staff, it is hard to make sure that we're creating opportunities for everyone to live out their values and play the role they want to play. And people with more capacity to do that in their lives are in a better position to get involved. And so there's definitely structural barriers we need to think about to make sure that anyone who wants to be a part of our movement, an active part of our movement, can be.
Thank you, Tomer. For one brief moment, I'm going to wear my Naamod hat and add to that the two things that I've noticed, and I think this is learning for LJ, I'm sure, as well, because in some ways I think LJ can teach us on this, is I think I've heard the critique that we are not as good at our multi-generationality as we could be. We're very much, not necessarily that this is an age divide, and it isn't always, but the fact that we're on Slack and all these platforms that are quite new to a lot of people. I've heard feedback that we need to be better about how our methods to make it a more multi-generational open space. And another thing is that Naamod was founded largely by people who were thought of themselves more as religious, whereas the Jewish left in general, at least of old, very much thought of itself in some ways as secular, atheist, non-theist. And so I think there's an interesting thing that's happening within Naamod where all those folks are there together, and we're trying to figure out, what is Jewish religious or a-religious identity look like? So just wanted to add that as extra kind of texture. Thank you so much. Let's go to, that way, Dex, you're not at the end of this round as well. Can we go to you, Dex, and hear, what can we learn as LJ from what you all have been doing, and what's the next phase of Homos and Houmous?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I just want to speak to the question of multi-generationality. And I think that on that one, I think that the best way to do that we've found is really to look at what is your history, whether that's what is the history of your movement, what is the history of the form that you're taking, what are the political histories that have been mapped. So certainly we work with a lot of fantastic artists who are over 60, who are over 70, people like the Cockney Music Hall artist Vivi Lax, or the performance artist and filmmaker Ruth Novacek. Really, really exciting people who've been doing this a really, really long time, and actually who've seen progressive moments of kind of of seeing Judaism and the Jewish left kind of lose its focus, lose its organization, and come back to what I think is right now a really exciting moment in socialist and Yiddish renaissance, which has not been surpassed in a really long time. As far as takeaways, I think it's remembering that none of us are an island, and that to get organized, you need to be part of broader movements, in whatever role that takes. That doesn't mean that you have to be the one spearheading everything yourself, but I think seeing what are my values and what kind of people around me are already doing this. The work that we've been able to do with Pink Peacock and with Judas before that, back in 2017, have really helped organize us as a movement and see who else is doing this. We've been working with Jews, who are a Jewish drag troupe based in Berlin, Hopefully we're going to go over there soon. As far as what we've got up next, we are in residency at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern in South London. And it's like this wonderfully old music hall venue that I think notoriously Freddie Mercury snuck Princess Diana in one night. And yeah, we're going to be there on the 9th of August. It's a Monday, very punk. If we're also planning, we've got a big tour coming up. This was the poster for the tour which went online. And we're going to be doing a big fundraiser in the coming months for that, a kind of drag auction. I think we're going to call it Smotherbees. And so we're going to be encouraging people to donate goods and services for that to raise money for this tour, because it's so expensive, because we don't pay cabaret fees. A lot of the time, cabaret venues are paying people sort of 30, 50 quid to perform, and we just will not do that anymore because it's not sustainable. So hopefully, if we make that kind of money, we'll be coming to Bristol, Sheffield, Manchester, Glasgow, and London. And support, get organised, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Dex. I think we have time to hear from Charley, and then what I want to do is a lightning round where you all say, where can we find you? How can we get involved with the project? And you can give us your, any social media or anything like that. I think people would really like to hear that at the end. Charley, you were an RSY movement worker, so I'm sure you have something to tell the establishment about how we can do better.
Okay. So I was going to say that I think being because Veranenu, what the sort of thing that we do is kind of like broadly synagogue adjacent. The thing that we've really struggled with in terms of what I've struggled with in terms of parent bodies and sort of big institutional things is that people look at Veranenu and see a group of young-ish people doing something, engaging people, which they struggle to do, and try and co-opt that and say, please come to my synagogue and do this thing for us so that we can draw on your resources and do what you do. And that is a bad approach because I think that makes it feel sort of instrumentalized and almost utilizing this thing that we're building intentionally for some other ends. So I think from the perspective of establishment communities, if there are people within those communities who have initiatives they want to set up, I don't think the role of the sort of overarching bodies is necessarily to try and work out how that can fit into pre-existing frameworks, but to give those sort of initiatives support, resources, space, if they really believe in what those things are doing, to let them grow and foster and all of these different things. There's definitely collaboration that can happen, which isn't sort of just being instrumentalized for other problems that are being faced. So that's my takeaway, I guess, on that. On the inclusion front, I think giving platforms to people who otherwise don't have platforms is really important. I think personally, in terms of the music stuff, my family is from Iraq. I've been trying to work out how to bring sort of Mizrahi music into a very American Ashkenazi type of sort of sphere, and that is challenging. It's something that I'm trying to really bring into what we're doing, trying to sort of draw on that, and there are some incredible people who I've been speaking to about that, which is great, and making things accessible and making sure that our events are open to everyone who wants to be a part of them. And I would just end by saying that I think the most important thing, and I think maybe something that all of us can sort of testify to through what we're doing, is that I think building radically compassionate communities is the way forward, or the way out of this sort of juncture that we find ourselves in. And I think that if the establishment sees that as an opportunity and something which is strengthening rather than sort of a threat to the way things have always been, I think that would be the way to go forward and to really strengthen the future of the Jewish community in the UK.
Thank you so much, Charley. I hope everyone was listening to that, and to all of the four of you. I'm so glad we got to do this. We're going to do a last lightning round, 30 seconds max, everybody. How do folks get involved with your project or support it going forward in LJ, people from LJ? And where can we find you or your work that we need to know? So let's, Dex, please.
Homos and Houmous, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and all our tickets are sold through a website called Outsavvy with 2 V's, and you can sign up there. You'll see a link to our mailing list. I love a mailing list. That's it.
Thank you. Tomer.
Yeah, so we would love to have anyone who wants to get involved in our movement to end British Jewish support for the occupation. You can find out more on our website, which is nowmod.org.uk. That's NAAMOD. And also on social media, you can search as well. And if you're not able to join or don't want to, if you want to support us just by following us and sharing us up on social media or donating to help us build our movement, that'd be really appreciated as well.
Thank you, Tomer. Charley.
We've been in a bit of a hiatus, but we'll be back hopefully in the coming months. So to keep up to date, there's a Facebook page, which is Veranenu, Veranenu. There's also a Facebook group if you want to sort of get involved in the sort of more community stuff. And yeah, I think that's the best place to find information. I don't have a concrete launch date yet, but it will be happening and it will be huge.
Thank you. And Morgan, to end us.
Our website is pinkpeacock.gay, that's G-A-Y. You can find us on social media at Die Rozeve Pava, that's transliterated as it's DIROZEVEPAVE. But if you just search Pink Peacock on Instagram and Twitter, you'll find us there. You can support us by sending us money on PayPal, that you'll find the button on our website, or on Patreon. We are patreon.com/Pink Peacock. You could also, I think, support us and get involved by considering a no-state solution to the Israel-Palestine question in the wonderful anarchist tradition. States will not save us. We will suffer the problems of imperialism and capitalism as long as we have nation states. That's my final plug. Have a fantastic May Day weekend. Thank you so much for having us, Leah, and Liberal Judaism.
Thank you all so much. This was the panel I was most looking forward to hearing from, and I'm just so glad that you all gave your time. All the other panels are wonderful too, but I just, I feel very honored that I've got to have this conversation with you all, and thank you for giving us your time to do it. I'm really hopeful that I'm gonna see you all in overlapping spaces through the projects that you're doing, and that many of us will at Liberal Judaism. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
Thanks.
Hello. Wow, that looked like an incredible session. So many things to think about. Amazing. Now coming up, we have lessons from our youth and young adult communities who I believe are experts in creating inclusive space. I'm excited to welcome our fabulous panel. We have Joe Hyman, we have Josh Powell, and we have Lauren Kalis, who will be joining us in just a moment. Here they are. Look at the magic. Thank you, magical tech team. Fabulous stuff. So I am Rabbi Anna Posner. I'm the student chaplain. I started just last September, so it's been an interesting year with students. Mostly, we've not been able to do everything. I say we, my colleague Adi at Reform Judaism and I work together. We've not been able to do everything that we wanted to do with the students this year. Everyone knows why, but it means we've had loads of time thinking about how do we create a creative space for such a diverse community of young adults across the campuses, often across denominations and different backgrounds. And I was tapping back into my time, grew up in LJY-Netzer, and always thought that youth movements and young adult spaces really are at the forefront of thinking, talking about, but also acting on inclusivity and creating inclusive space. And so I thought, who best to talk to while we're talking about breaking down walls, creating inclusive space, than some of the leaders of our young adult communities. We've got Josh here from LJY-Netzer, Joe from JW3, and Lauren from Moisture House. And that's enough from me. I'm going to go to each of you, and I'd like you to tell me a little bit about your organization, and also, what do you think it means when we say inclusion or when we talk about inclusive space? So as you are to my right, Josh, we are going to start with you.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel today. So I'm Josh. I'm the LJY-Netzer movement worker, and my pronouns are he, him. So LJY-Netzer, as I'm sure many of you know, is the youth movement for liberal Judaism. And we believe in liberal Judaism, Reform Zionism, Tikkun Olam, and youth empowerment is kind of a brief touch on what our ideology is. And we run things like sleepovers and weekend events. We've got Kadima coming up again this summer, and a new camp, Machane Haneni, for 15 to 17-year-olds. So for us, really, as we're like working mainly with young people aged between like 8 and 17, so it's really in people's formative years. For us, like creating an inclusive space on our camps and like beyond is about creating an environment where all of the participants that come on our camps are able to like flourish and grow and build in their confidence, that they're able to explore their identity without fear of like prejudice or judgment, and also like build their own identity. So I think for us, that's kind of really where like an inclusion space like hones in.
Amazing. So for you, that space is about individual identity. I love it. Thank you so much, Josh. Lauren, we'll go to you.
Thank you so much again, also for inviting me to talk on this panel. And I have to say that Josh is also living with me in Moishe House. We're different areas, but we're living here together. So as Rabbi Anna said, I'm Lauren. I work at the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and I'm living in the newest Moishe House in East London in Hackney. So returning back to the family roots. And for those of you who don't know what Moishe House is, we are a group of young people who are living in a house, and we have a rent subsidy, and we are creating a community and hosting events for other young Jews in our area. So we moved in a few days before lockdown. So kind of as everyone's experience of the year has obviously been extremely shaped by the pandemic, but we're very excited to have started building our community, and for people to actually come inside instead of just virtually at some point soon. So I think inclusion, I think it is complicated. I don't think anyone's cracked it, which is why I think it is really positive to be, having this space to even talk about it. And I'm very excited to hear from my other friends and panelists on their thoughts. But I think there's kind of two sides of it. I think there's a very
having this space to even talk about it. I'm very excited to hear from my other friends and panelists on their thoughts. But I think there's kind of two sides of it. I think there's very
but like
having this space like a bit more. I'm very excited to hear from my other friends and panelists on their thoughts. But I think there's kind of two sides of it. I think there's very but like having this space like a bit more.
I'm so sorry here. We seem to have an issue with the sound. Lauren, we will come back to you because I very much want to hear your answer. I'm so sorry about that. But Joe, whilst we sort out the sound, we're going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm Joe Hyman. I work at JW3. I manage our young JW3 program and some other programs as well. And if you don't know what JW3 is, our vision is a vibrant, diverse, unified British Jewish community inspired and engaged with Jewish arts, culture, learning, and life. So it's exciting working there, kind of having that challenge of united, vibrant, diverse. But for inclusivity, I think I've been thinking a lot about this through the kind of year and a half I've been working at JW3, and how to create an inclusive space specifically for young people. And for me, it's a mixture between a kind of practice and a policy of providing equal opportunities to people who kind of were otherwise excluded or marginalized. That's a definition that I've kind of found and kind of connected with. And the reason is because it's a practice in the sense that it's constant, it's never really ending, and people make mistakes. So I think it's something that you learn consistently. The more you include, the more voices you hear, and the more work you have to do. But we're working at an organization like JW3, where there's a big constellation of teams and different things going on. It also needs to be a policy, something that you can kind of hold accountable. And we need to be held accountable when it comes to that. So that's the kind of balance for me. At its core, it's about listening to people that may not be heard in the community that we live in.
Well, okay, so we have there, it's about listening to people. It's about giving space to those who might otherwise feel excluded. And I really like what you added in there, that bit about policy. It's all well and good talking about it and even doing it now and again, but to have something that holds us accountable is also key and part of it. We've lost Lauren just temporarily. I'm assured she will be back. In fact, she'll be back very soon. But what I've noticed, what I think is really interesting about this group that we've got here is that two of you, both Joe and Lauren, and also Josh, when you've got your Moishe House hat on, are working in multi-denominational spaces. So it's not just about how are we inclusive within a liberal Jewish framework, but actually how do we create space that is open for anybody of all denominations and none to feel welcome in the space as well. Lauren, I'm so glad to have you back. We're going to hand back over to you for you to tell us what you think inclusivity means.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the sound issue. Hopefully it won't happen again. But I think what I was saying, I'm not sure quite when the sound cut out, but I think it is very complicated, and I think that's why it's really positive for us to be talking about it today, and also for us as young community builders to be working with each other and sharing best practices. But I think it's about, there's kind of one side about providing an equal access to opportunities that we're facilitating in our community. And then I also think it's about having a very proactive mindset. It always needs to be on the agenda. It can't be an afterthought. It needs to just be completely embedded into everything that we do and everything that we communicate with. So, looking at who's not in the room and what can we do to make sure that everyone in the room is feeling comfortable. And for us, as we're building our new Moishe House community, we have to be communicating what our values are and what we're going to be creating this space about, to make sure that people do come in. So I think, kind of two-sided, a very practical thing, and then just also being part of kind of the mindset of everything we do.
That's amazing. And you use the word comfortable, and I wonder if maybe that will come up in what else we talk about, because when you've got a diverse space, is the goal comfort? Or is there something else going on there? I often think that maybe everyone needs to be a little bit more uncomfortable so that more people can feel comfortable. But I don't know, we can leave that for discussion. And I love what you say as well, Lauren, that it's an ever-changing conversation. What was happening in LJY 10 years ago when I was movement worker is very different from what's going on in LJY now, and in all the other spaces as well, because the conversations have changed and moved on as we come to understand more and more. I think it's probably safe to say what was happening in all our spaces last year, 2 years ago, is very different from what's going on now as well. Amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to start, Lauren, we're going to go back to you this time, backwards before going forwards again. What do you find as challenges to creating inclusive space?
Thank you. I think I was thinking about this, and I think because we are in the process of building it, I think we've tried to look ahead at our challenges, but haven't experienced too much with it being in a virtual space, and also because we're at early stages. But I think the challenge goes down to, I think, how I see my role in Moishe House, and I see it, we're called community builders, but I kind of see it more as a facilitating role. So I think the kind of challenge is that it's not up to just us as the residents in the house to create an inclusive space, and actually everyone that we welcome has a role to contribute and help build this space, which I think is of great benefit, and also sometimes challenges when you're meeting new people and bringing new people together to create a space where everyone's kind of coming together with the same goal. And then I think the biggest challenge is about including people that limit the inclusion of others, which I think is a really big challenge, and something that I think with a lot of these conversations, it is very hard about where to draw the lines of the tense. But I think that is the main thing. If everyone that comes into our house are opening the doors for other people to come and meaningfully engage, I think we will be a positive community where people feel comfortable and challenged. But if people are coming in and are closing the doors for other people, then I think that's the main problem. And then I think, there are practical challenges in the fact that we are a house predominantly made up of liberal Jews, and kind of the, in some ways, I think, having grown up in LJY-Netzer, it's very much a core to kind of how we prioritize things. But I also think that there is a certain way that all of us in the house kind of connect to our Judaism and enjoy our Judaism. And the truth is, we're going to be welcoming people that have different ways of expressing and connecting with community in Judaism. And I think that will be also a challenge for us to make sure that we're learning and opening the door.
Yeah, and keeping that door open. It's a lovely analogy. Joe, what are your challenges at JW3?
Well, we're an organization that attempts, I guess, the broadest kind of, part of the Jewish community as much as possible. The idea is to get as many different types of Jews into JW3, interacting with each other as possible. And I guess balancing those different groups' desire for inclusivity in different ways, and their kind of intersectional identities, because they'll come in with lots of different kind of backgrounds and opinions. And I think balancing that can be really difficult. And often things happen, and some people have a sense of discomfort. They've walked into a space that isn't necessarily, what they're used to. Or they've met someone that shares an opinion that they're not comfortable with. But I think part of our mission is an assumption of there's a sense of discomfort in most of what we do. There won't be discomfort in a Krav Maga class, but you might meet someone in a Krav Maga class that's completely different to you, and their opinion might be challenging. So I think there's an assumption in what we do, there'll be some discomfort. But I think one challenge is that inclusive space needs to be collaborative. And often, in my experience in the Jewish community, I've seen inclusivity kind of as a top-down effort. That's just my experience, and I think the whole project needs to be a collaboration with other people, because I think without that, you don't actually get anything fully changed. I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult when our world is so quick and requires quick responses. And really, inclusivity is about building relationships with people that haven't necessarily been heard. So I think that's kind of a main challenge for me. I think the way we approach it and kind of address that challenge to some extent is addressing our blind spots. So, for example, with my program, I was brought in and had to build an advisory group made up of a diverse set of Jews. And it's been my challenge over the past year to kind of listen to those people and let it inform our program, and not just be like, Joe's got a nice idea for a program, let's just do it. Actually listen to those people, and it comes across through other parts of our program as well, but it's a challenge.
And Joe, both you and Lauren touched upon the kind of communal effort that you're facilitators of creating this inclusive community. And you both also said something which I think is so important about when we're talking about inclusive space, we're talking about sharing a space with a variety of ideas, values, opinions. And it's not just necessarily, LGBT inclusion or any other kind of inclusion we might think of, but it's actually just a diversity of an individual and what that might bring to the space. Josh, tell us about the challenges you have at LJY-Netzer.
Yeah, I think similarly to kind of what's been said, there's definitely such a challenge that it's always growing and it's always an ongoing process. And I think with LJY-Netzer, there's challenges to do with getting everyone into the space to begin with. Camp has a financial cost. Also, for example, Sandroid, the site that we use currently, isn't wheelchair accessible, and that's something that we've been like looking to change whenever we've been like looking for new sites. And then also when you think about staffing, like does everyone have like the experience or the exposure necessary to like deal with any inclusion issue that may arise, and are we all going to be able to support like every child that comes onto our camp in the way that they need to be supported? So there's always these questions that we have to like ask ourselves before any of the camps happen, and think about is there like additional training that needs to be done this year before camp for them to try and like solve that. And then also I know that in organizations like JW3 and Moishe House, we're like, it's amongst our peers, but even in a camp setting, I think to an extent, like you are like led by the participants and led by like them and them as a community. And so that's also like another challenge you have, is that we have with LJY-Netzer, we have them for like 2 weeks often in the summer, and then there's like a whole year until the next camp, and we try and build this like inclusive space where people feel supported, and then we don't have them for like as long for like another year, although we do have weekend events and shorter camps as well. So another challenge, really think about how do we like maintain the momentum of like building inclusive spaces, and how do we work with integrating new people into LJY, and how do we really like educate them and make sure that they share the values of inclusivity, and that they also want to celebrate like the participants around them and their community for like the diversity within it. So yeah, so I think that those are kind of like the three main sorts of areas within LJY that I see as being the challenges to inclusivity.
Yes, it's a real different setup, really. You've got these events that happen throughout the year, and it must be a challenge keeping that momentum. And also, like you say, welcoming new people into the ethos of the space that you all create. I think that leads us perfectly into a question we've had in the chat from Sarah Newman, who says, I'm a big advocate for Jewish youth movements, but what do we do when we age out of them? How do we keep that enthusiasm and empowerment going? Is there somebody who wants to dive into that one first?
I'm happy to.
Go for it, Lauren.
I think all well, having grown up in LJY, it's had a like such a profound impact on my values, and also the importance of community. And I think community is not something we will ever age out of. And I think it's about connecting with like-minded people. So I'm obviously going to say, Sarah, please come round to the Moishe House when you can. But I think if there's never going to be one person just feeling that way, and I think it's about talking to people and finding new communities or building new communities. We can never have too much of people connecting with others, and it's one thing I'm really have enjoyed about kind of Zoom and being able to just be able to kind of talk and work with so many more people, and I think if you've got an idea and think it's a good idea, there are going to be other people that are looking for the same thing. And so it's what kind of Joe was saying about being collaborative, and meeting like-minded people that you can be a part of a community and help create the space for others.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Lauren. Does anyone else want to respond to this question as well? Go for it, Joe.
So I think there's two pieces kind of within a denomination or a kind of community. I think it's about ensuring there are leadership opportunities ready for people at that point when they kind of grow out of youth movements. I think that's something that I didn't see so much growing up. However, I think the importance of spaces like Moishe House and JW3, where they're kind of melting pots, where people get to a point when they're in their mid-20s and they've grown out of a youth movement, and sometimes their values, their interests have changed. And I think it's important to have spaces like JW3 and Moishe House where they can come, meet other people, explore what Judaism means to them on their own terms, not necessarily in their family's terms or in their grandparents' terms, but on their own terms. and then find where they fit. They may fit in a more cultural setting. They may fit in a different denomination setting. They may come back to their original one. But I think that space and making sure that there are spaces where people can explore that is vital in allowing people to kind of grow into who they are and not necessarily who particular community desires them to be, I guess.
Thank you. Exploring your own space in your own Judaism. That's fabulous. Josh, did you want to add?
I mean, obviously, Lauren can kind of speak very much similarly to me in that we've both kind of taken the same approach to how to kind of keep that enthusiasm and empowerment going. So really kind of, what I could say is like to reiterate what other people have said, and always like kind of wherever I've gone, I've always like taken what I've learned from LJY and tried to like implement it. Like whilst I was at Edinburgh University, we kind of formed an alternative to the Edinburgh JSOC because we wanted to create a space that felt more like inclusive of who we were. And so we would do like Friday night dinners and things like that together, and like come together on like Hanukkah or like film festivals. And then like when I graduated from uni, again, it was like, oh, how do we like keep going? And that was when me and Lauren obviously decided that we would start like Moshe House Hackney. So I think definitely it's worth just researching like what's out there, because I think sometimes it can feel like there aren't things out there other than like your youth movement. But there actually are, and just like a few Googles and looking around, you'll find there are like a few Moshe houses like dotted around London. There's JW3, there's like other initiatives as well. And then also just like talk to your friends, and like maybe they'll be up for like starting something with you as well. So I think that's kind of what I would say.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think Sarah made a very good point as well, that all of us are based in London, and there is Jews spread far and wide, and Jews from all over the place on this conference as well. And I will say, with my rabbi hat on as well, don't forget that there are vast numbers of LJ communities everywhere who would love to have more young people there, and also already have things going on for young adults and young people. So don't be afraid of checking out what your local synagogue is up to. And there you might find kindred spirits as well. Thank you so much for that question. If anyone else has other questions, please do add them to the chat, and we'll hope to get to them. My next question is, what do you think that your organization does uniquely or uniquely well when thinking about implementing inclusive space? So we will go back to Joe.
Sure, and I'll just say to Sarah before I start that we've learned a huge amount over this past year about access, and that's kind of part of inclusivity. And we have many online events for young people coming up in May, and we'd love you to be part of them. So check out on the website. But our organization, what I've learned in the past year and a half working at JW3 about what our organization does best when it comes to inclusive space is that we're one of the only spaces where different voices can come together and have conversations at high level, which is really exciting within the Jewish community. And when we are open, when our building is open, there's a culture of encounter. You can meet someone that's different to you at the staircase, or you can meet someone who's different to you at the coffee shop and learn something new. And that's really special. When it comes to young people, I think having a clear program that's made by young people for young people and formed by a diverse bunch of young people is vital. So I think often programs may be, again, top down, and it needs to be created by the people who are experiencing it. That's what I think JW3 does best at the moment.
Encounter, and from it coming from the bottom up. That's great. Josh, over to you.
Yeah, it's so funny thinking about it, like what do you do uniquely well, because we're so used to only ever looking at it through the lens of like what can we be doing better. But I think in LJY, something that's like quite unique is that it's so led by our members. So like a lot of the things that like come into place within LJY of like what our educational priorities are for the year, like what we can do, it comes from our Veda, which is our like decision-making body, where all of our members from like I think 16 upwards kind of come together and like we take a look at like LJY and where it's at and where we want it to be at in the future, and think about like what can we do to like implement it to get there. So a lot of these like initiatives and like things to do with conversations around inclusion are actually like sparked by our younger members, and there's also a decision-making event Kinnis for our even younger members where these things come up, and then they get kind of like fed back to us, and like we talk about them as well, and like one of them comes and like kind of talks through like what they've been thinking. So I think that's definitely something that is great about inclusion and LJY, is that it's a collaborative project between all of our members like across the age spectrum. And so for me as like a movement worker, specifically, like my role is very much like listen to like what the members are saying and like what they want, and what they think we could be doing better, and how they think we could do things to make them feel better supported. And I think that's just such a lovely thing about LJY, and there's something like so special about things that are around like, oh, I'd love it if you could like do this, coming from like our like 9-year-old members, and it's like a really like heartwarming experience. And I think another thing with inclusion that's kind of advantage that I think LJY has as a space is that at the end of the day, like camp is like so much fun, and like it means that there's so much there's such a broader way to engage with inclusivity than just like educating on it, and like because obviously it's such like a serious subject, but it's also something to really like celebrate. And I think sometimes it can be easy to forget like the fun in it. And so like an example of that would be that each year we choose a theme of the year, and that this year our theme of the year is Rainbow Jews, which was voted again at Beda. So that's really about looking at Judaism through like an LGBTQ+ lens. But the way that the theme works is it's then like woven into like our Gangeshlafs, it's woven into our Erev Tarbut, so it becomes not just like an educational framework, but also like a tool for like cultural celebration, which is just also such a important part of like pushing it to being a celebratory space as well as being an inclusive one.
Amazing. And the fact that was chosen as the theme of the year says something, I think, as well about the space that has already been set up at the youth movement. I have another question. I've forgotten somebody. Lauren, I'm so sorry. Lauren, tell us about the challenges that you have at Moishe House.
So I was kind of thinking about our year in the Moishe House, and actually thought back to our application process for starting the house, and remembered that one of the first questions we were asked was, how do we feel about inclusion? What would we do to create an inclusive space? So I think that was a very actually clear way, which I maybe overlooked at the time because I wouldn't have expected anything less, but it really showed from the get-go, if this wasn't a priority for you, then Moishe House shouldn't be a place for you. I think we're very lucky that there are funds available to make our house a more inclusive space. So, you know, if someone did have accessibility needs, we would be able to facilitate them. And then we also have been provided with quite a lot of training opportunities, and I think that is something, you know, you introduced us all as experts, which I think is very kind, and I don't think I am an expert, but I think the reason why I'm living in a Moishe House and so happy to be on the panel today is because inclusion is a huge priority of mine, and I think I know I don't have all of the answers, but I think it's important to ask those questions, to, you know, take on different training courses to learn, to improve. So I think that's very much part of the culture of Moishe House and our development as Moishe House residents. And then I think also we're big fans of getting feedback, and I think that's something that's really important. And we are going into this obviously with the best intentions, but we might mess up, and we might not know the kind of needs of our members as they come, and I think that we really want to make it very clear that we are open to criticism and feedback, because we constantly want to improve the work that we're doing, and know that our community will all play a role in help making that happen. And kind of lastly, I was thinking about it that to be an inclusive space, we also have to be an attractive space. And I think a lot about, well, why we wanted to set up the Moishe House and what's shaping a lot of our programming is thinking, what are young Jews missing from other spaces that we can provide? So it's really great that Moishe House allows us to be very creative with the programming that we do, and yeah, we hope that, you know, people aren't going to want to come to our Moishe House if they can be doing the same thing somewhere else. So we want to provide kind of a new and attractive and exciting place. So I think that's some of the things that Moishe House is good at.
And I think in saying that you're not an expert and why you're not an expert is actually why I think you're all experts. It's this ongoing process. We're never going to get it perfect. Well, maybe we're never going to get it perfect. I'm open to that, for that to be a conversation as well. But it's ongoing learning and training and I suppose tooling up on how to make these spaces as inclusive as possible. I think a really interesting point that someone's just popped in as a question in terms of challenges is, as we know in liberal Judaism, we're a diverse range of communities, sometimes in very small and remote places, maybe not remote places, but still small communities. And so Gillian Dawson says that her community has no opportunities for children. It's geographically split. It's a geographically split community in the south of England, and none of her children are in the room, as Lauren so eloquently put it. Not Cheder, not LJ activities. How do they include them? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and add thoughts to this question.
Yeah, I feel like it should.
Josh, take it away
on this one. No, definitely there is a challenge with the LJ communities. So many of them are like dotted around in like more remote areas, and we don't have such a concentrated hub as like other streams of Judaism. I think from like an LJY perspective, I know that the virtual events that we've done that started because of coronavirus. For example, the Pesach packages that we sent out to do on Zoom, the Hanukkah ones as well, and like various other virtual activities over the year, and of course like the ones we've done over Biennial this weekend. They may have like started because of coronavirus, but they're not going to finish when the pandemic finishes. We've really enjoyed like connecting with people from more remote locations and starting to like bring in those communities more. And we definitely want to continue to run like these kind of like virtual programming, because we have definitely found it really, really valuable. And I mean, I would definitely say to like Gillian specifically, or to like any other LJ community members who are watching, like definitely please do feel free to like email me of josh@liberaljudaism.org, and I'm like so happy to like call with you if you wanted LJY to run a specific session online just for your community. We can do that as well if they don't yet feel ready to like join in the bigger ones. And I think also like we're talking that collaboration is like so important. I think it's definitely worth reaching out to other communities as well, because I know many of them move their Heders online virtually, but and although like they may start resuming in person, they are still going to continue with a hybrid model of online or offline. And I think that's something that like we need to think about, is that these things are there, but maybe we're not always signposting to them as best as we could, and maybe we need to like improve how much we push these these projects that we know are going on, and we like assume sometimes I think that everyone knows is going on. And I think definitely the questions from like Sarah and now from Gillian has made me realize that the projects that we think everyone knows about, I think often they don't actually all know about it.
amazing, Josh. And I think you showed the incredible resources at Liberal Judaism and indeed LJY-Netzer for communities who want to do things with their children. You guys are there to help with that as well and help facilitate that. That's really great. My next question is, we talk about inclusion and wanting to make sure people can come in the room. We've had the analogy of leaving the door open. But are there boundaries to inclusion? And how do you understand what those boundaries are and implement them? I think with this one, we'll start with you, Lauren.
Thank you. I think this is it's a hard question, and I think what we've done as a house, we can't talk about it enough, and we I think, you know, so we are actually also going to carry on doing virtual events, but as we kind of are welcoming new people into our house, I think we as kind of as the house facilitators, the community facilitators, we probably need to discuss this even more than we already have been. So I think that's one thing, making sure that we're very clear and we're all on the same page with that. And then also looking at kind of the other things that we can do to give those signals that about what we stand for in terms of inclusion. So we hope to bring in different speakers to run activities, and we hope to have a broad range of activities. So we want to make sure that there are clear signals going out all of the time for people to understand who we are and what we stand for as a community. And I also think kind of while we're in the early stages of it, it's about, you know, we've all talked about kind of how our work on inclusion is an ongoing process, and I think it fits into that building a community is an ongoing process. And I want to make sure that kind of in our early days, we're doing our events are kind of bringing people together in very kind of a neutral and not a challenging way, and a very comfortable and safe way, and kind of to build on the things that unite us, that we have in common, even if it is a very small thing, just really building on those common foundations before we start kind of really challenging this space and letting our community develop. So I'm not so clear on it, and I think it's about kind of very clear communication and for it to be embedded into everything that we do. But I think we will have some challenges, but I think it's about kind of how we work together to overcome them and limit those challenges.
And maybe working out those boundaries is part of that challenge there. Joe, what do you think? What are some boundaries to inclusion?
So I think boundaries kind of come from, I guess, values. And something that I learned hosting our Young JW3 series denomination is that in a denominational space, there are particular values that really, really make clear where the lines are in a lot of ways. Not everywhere, but in a lot of ways. JW3's values are inclusivity, community, creativity, loving kindness, collaboration, and leading by example. 6 wonderful values. And that's what guides us when it comes to kind of setting boundaries. But there aren't necessarily clear ones, because all of our stakeholders, all of our community members come from different spaces. So it's a balancing act constantly to make sure that there are specific places for people to grow in their own kind of marginalized community. So kind of LGBTQ Cafe, which we host at Young JW3, but also making sure that people feel safe throughout the program, whatever event they go to, or in our building. But it's something that's very much a live conversation at JW3 right now as to kind of what do boundaries look like when you're working in this cross-communal space.
Thank you, Joe. Josh, what do you find are the boundaries at LJY-Netzer?
No, definitely. It is a really interesting question and a really hard one to delineate. And I think, for LJY-Netzer, I think as in comparison to like JW3 and Moishe House, like LJY-Netzer on paper should have like really like clear boundaries, right? Like it's the youth movement for liberal Judaism. So that's like one clear like boundary first there is that LJY-Netzer is a space for like liberal Jews. Therefore, the boundaries are going to be grounded in like not just like liberal Judaism as a practice, but liberal Jewish values as well. So, for example, though like LJY is inclusive, we wouldn't run a prayer service where men and women sat separately, not just because that's not the religion we do, but also because we don't believe in the gender binary or doing anything to try and enforce it or impose it on people. And so like that's kind of an example of where like liberal Jewish as a religion and as a belief system kind of like comes together, and that's where like some of the boundaries get drawn for LJY. And then we also have other things that we've specifically voted on as a movement, such as like aligning with the feminist movement, taking an anti-occupation stance. So those again are lines that kind of like LJY-Netzer participants have like drawn for ourselves, of that we aren't going to be welcoming to people who deny who aren't aligned with the feminist movement, for example. But then like it gets kind of, I think, and you know, we enforce it with things like we have a code of conduct that goes out, we have a joining pack that goes out to anyone that signs up to LJY-Netzer for the first time, so that they're aware of what sort of space they're going into, and they can decide for themselves whether or not it's one that is going to like work for them. But then I think it becomes trickier when I think it's important to loop back to like what you were saying earlier about it's important to be a bit uncomfortable. And therefore with LJY-Netzer, I think whilst we're like drawing all of these boundaries, it's like, but how do we still challenge? How do we still engage? How do we like avoid ourselves becoming an echo chamber? And also how do we, so if we wanted to like engage with someone to challenge us, like how do we engage with that without platforming them? And it becomes like a much more challenging issue, and one that I think is like ever developing and like ever being like engaged with.
And it's interesting because you've got a different take in some ways because of the boundaries of liberal Judaism, or the, I don't know if boundaries is the right word, but the framework of liberal Judaism being part, and also the members creating those boundaries together. Whereas Lauren and Joe, you're both in these multi-denominational spaces, and finding those boundaries may be more tricky. But Josh, as you so eloquently put as well, it's about not making ourselves too comfortable by becoming these echo chambers and just sticking with what we know. We've had two really poignant questions, I think, from Rabbi Leah Jordan. One is, what are the founding elements from which you grow, and what is the Jewish that you're growing? It's a tough question. Does anyone want to jump in with it first? Did anyone get a gut feeling?
I mean, I think I grow when I learn. I think taking it kind of simply, but that's kind of what came to mind. And I think you learn in so many different ways. And from each person, I've already this year have learned so much, and it's just by having those conversations. So I think, and I also think learning is an active and ongoing process. And I think that is my Judaism, and I hope that this will be a place where it's the very much the norm in Moshe House. And even when it's just us as the residents just having dinner, we always end up talking about some issue or problem in a deep way. And I think that is what I love about it. And I think, you know, when you learn, you are challenged, and when you learn, you develop, and it means it's kind of a more exciting place where you are able to give and also receive.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Lauren. Does anyone else want to jump in with an answer? Go for it, Joe.
Sure. I think for me, it's about kind of what are the Judaisms that we're growing. And it's about quality, variety, and volume at JW3. That's kind of our thing, and multiple entry points to Jewish life. I think that's the exciting thing for me. There isn't a particular Judaism that JW3 is offering. It's cultural, it's also religious, it's also this, it's also that. There's lots of things going on, and seeing what that looks like when it comes together is exciting for us.
Amazing, thank you. The multiple entry points. Josh, do you want to add your 2 cents?
No, definitely. I think with like youth movements specifically, like youth movements exist. The founding elements of them are that we want to change the world essentially, and that is like where youth movements come from. And so like our whole ideology of like liberal Judaism, Reform Zionism, Tikkun Olam, and youth empowerment are all built around the ideas that like when LJY was founded and these principles were decided as the most important ones, was because we had a critique of either how like Judaism was or like how the world around us was. Like for example, to take like liberal Judaism as an example, the like critique when LJY kind of started was young people being disengaged in Judaism, Judaism not feeling relevant for young people, and then the mission for LJY was to like reinvent it, experiment, do like fun things, do things that like haven't been done before in like more traditional spaces, and like encourage people to develop their own relationship with it. And so I think kind of from that, like the Jewish that like we're growing as a movement and that we want to grow is really one rooted in like activism, one rooted in like challenging, one rooted in like radical thought. And I think you kind of like see that a lot of the times from so many LJY-Netzer Bogramot go on to work in charities or startups or NGOs. And so I think that's kind of like at the heart of like what we want to do is we want to inspire other liberal Jews to go out and like take what they've learned from LJY and like put it into the wider world. I know at least that's definitely what I would like love to do in the future.
And between us, we've got such a variety. We've got a Judaism of action, a Judaism of learning, and a Judaism of variety, I think, in Joe's answer there. And between it just makes for a wonderfully inclusive space. So I've pegged you each as the experts. I've made this bold statement that youth and young adults and young adult spaces do the best job of inclusion. So with that in mind, this pressure that I've put on each of you, I'm going to ask, what advice would you give to those trying to create more inclusive space? And Josh, we're going to start with you.
I think really what I would say is kind of it's very much like looping back to like what Lauren said earlier, is that obviously it was very generous of you to call us experts, and it's not necessarily how we like describe ourselves, and that no one has all of the answers. But that's why these kind of panels and discussions I think are so valuable, because no one has all the answers, but everyone has like a little bit of an answer. And then when we kind of like put it together, that's when we can start making progress. So I think like my advice to those trying to create more inclusive spaces would just be like really like collaborate, call, speak to people. Sometimes it can feel like so overwhelming and daunting thinking about like what can we do to make our space more inclusive? Like how do we get over these like enormous hurdles that we have like in our heads looking at it? And it's about like kind of taking a step back and realizing that you probably don't have to fully reinvent the wheel. There's probably other people who have had similar challenges and have overcome them, and just kind of by like speaking to each other, sharing like best practice, sharing ideas, and then also like listening to the community that you're working with, whether it's like a Jewish community or like whoever is around you that is in the space that you're operating. So it's about like listening and collaborating, and I think that's really at the heart of like what we all need to do.
Thank you so much, Josh. Joe, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Well, I guess first of all, just address what's at stake here. I think for me, inclusion is about creating futures for people that can't see it for themselves. So that's the really kind of the vital point that's in the center of all of this. That's what's at stake. But the advice, and at risk of sounding like I'm going to list a couple of things that I've learned, kind of, that sound a bit like Instagram quotes, but being aware that this isn't a tick box exercise and it's never going to be over. Accepting that and kind of just starting, listening and not being defensive, centering the people that you're listening to, accepting imperfection, but constantly striving for more. And two last things are kind of doing the work in your space or community that you're able to respond quickly when something happens that's really needs a voice on it, kind of something that happens in the world that needs people to see that an organization is listening and hearing, but also being able to do the long-term work that's needed. You have to balance that, especially in bigger organizations. And for me, it's about taking risks and being bold, like pushing the boundaries of what it looks like to be Jewish and seeing what happens. Because I think that's when you find the people that may not have been heard or seen before.
Thank you so much, Joe. These are some great tips. Lauren, I hand to you with the same question.
Thank you. I think I thought about this kind of maybe in three steps. Starting off, I think you can never be too clear about communicating what you stand for and what the space that you want to create stands for. And we can never take for granted that people will assume that this is going to be an inclusive space. And I think we need to, and I think LJ broadly, I think is really great at it. And it's definitely something we are trying to kind of take to our Moishe house to make it kind of very clear. And then, similar to what Joe said, it's an active thing. We've got to do the work. It needs to be proactive, and we need to be constantly striving to be better and really dedicating time for it. It's not something that can just happen automatically. And then I think the last thing is to be open to criticism and to receive feedback to improve. And I think, and I see it in a lot of communal spaces that people maybe want to be inclusive, but maybe aren't as willing to make the changes that are therefore needed with the people that they are included. So I think it's about making it clear what you stand for, doing the work, and be open to criticism and feedback to improve.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much to all of you. I mean, some really insightful tips that you each had about not being defensive, listening. I think it came out in all of our answers is the ongoing process of inclusion. And Lauren, you said, do not assume that just because you say you're an inclusive space and inside the space you talk about how inclusive you are, that everyone outside the space knows about that. And I think, Josh, you touched upon that as well with saying, oh, we thought people knew about what was going on, but clearly some people don't. I want to say a huge thank you to the three of you for coming and sharing your wisdom. A shout out to the things that you each do. People should check out LJY-Netzer, what's going on at JW3 and what's happening at Moishe House, because whilst we can't be together in person, there's loads going on online. And of course, student chaplaincy, if you know of young people going to university or thinking about university, then they are welcome to be in touch with me. And as we all try together to create these inclusive spaces. So thank you so much to all of you. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just an announcement about what's coming up next. So we've come to the lunch hour to 12:30. Please grab something to eat if you have been with us from the morning today. And there are options for lunch and learns. You will, if you have signed up, you have to sign up for those. You will have the links in your email. We've got Rabbi Dr. Margaret Jacoby talking about a time to break down and a time to build. Is there a limit to change? Rabbi Alex Wright, a lunch and learn, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the congregation of the Eternal One. Breaking down walls, what about Ruth, the Moabitess, and Boaz? And then Rabbi Richard Jacoby and Mish Sampson talking about inclusive services over a lunch and learn, an example of changing the what and the how. And then after those, you've had time to have lunch. We will meet back here in all the various ways that you've been watching at Biennial for a 2 p.m. session, a liberal Jewish liturgy with Professor Dahlia Marks, Rabbi Leah Molstein, Rabbi Mark Solomon, and Rabbi Eli Tikva talking about the Liberal Judaism prayer book and the co-editing of that by both Rabbis Leah and Eli. And Mark Solomon as a team member, Rabbi Mark Solomon talking about our prayer language, and them all asking the questions, how can we create liturgy that is involved in justice work? And that's going to be, they're going to be joined by Rabbi Professor Dalia Marks from Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, who is co-editing the Israeli Reform Prayer Book. Can liturgy be inclusive is the question. So stay tuned for that at 2 p.m. in all of the biennial spaces, and enjoy lunch, and you're off to your lunch and learns at 12:30. You'll have the links to those in your email. See you all soon.